yo blanca nací y del sol del verano yo me hice así, moreni, gracioso y ojos pretos tú. Morenica mi me llama, yo me voy graciosi su morenica, graciosica sos, tu morena y yo gracioso y ojos pretos tú. Morenica, graciosica sos, tu morena y yo gracioso y ojos pretos tú. Abre tu puerta cerrada, que en tu balcón ninguna luz no hay. La mi sangre no te puedo perdonar. Mala mi muerte con placer. La mi sangre no te puedo perdonar. Mala mi muerte con placer. los odio hecho. Oh, his monsters tú echarás siempre por mí te acordarás. Oh, his monsters tú echarás siempre por mí te acordarás. Abre tu puerta cerrada, que en tu balcón ninguna luz no hay. La mi sangre no te puedo perdonar, mala mi muerte con placer. La mi sangre no te puedo perdonar, mala mi muerte con placer. Loco que haga un ramal, no sabe hacer convites, calvamos de por adulzar, dáteles por confites. Georgina, Georgina, metrelanes polakemo. Georgina, Georgina, metrelanes polakemo. El anillo que llevas tú, el diamante fino, el givargi que me lo hizo, es primo hermano mío.
Alta, alta es la luna cuando empieza a esclarecer. Y yo hermosa y sin ventura nunca llegué a nacer. Y yo hermosa y sin ventura nunca llegué a nacer. Mis ojos necesitan tirer la mar, vaporicos van y vienen, letra para mí no hay. Vaporicos van y vienen, letra para mí no hay.
Okay, welcome to the World Alliance of Qara'im Shabbat Torah study. I'm Vayakhel of Hakhamim. This is one of my favorite Spardi Ladino songs. Beautiful song. Okay, so we're going to be doing a little We're going to be doing a double parsha this week, and we've got Vayakhel and Pekudei. Pretty long one. I doubt we're going to get through it. We never do it anyway, even on the short ones. But we shall try our best. So here we go. All right, give me some music. Okay, so I'm going to actually go back a little bit just to get some context, because the first couple of verses of chapter 35 are very, very relevant to Karaism, as we shall see. So I just want to get a little bit of context in there. And let's see, we're going to do it this way. Okay, so we're going to go back into Exodus 34. So we didn't get to it last week, but just to review, Exodus 32 was the golden calf. Moses breaks the 10 commandments. And then the Israelites leave Sinai, right? And I think we have this from last year. No, it's the other one. Hold on a second here. I just got to get it up. Just give me 1 second here. 1 second, please. Hello. Okay. We go to recent. Where did I do it? Where did I put that? Torah stuff. There it is. Okay. All right. So bring it back here. Pop that in. And that should do it. Okay, so journeys. Okay, here are the journeys. I'll enlarge this just a little bit. Right, so we're in oh, that's interesting. Oh, many entries skipped. I made a note for myself. So we'll add it, all right? So if we go back here, the command to leave Sinai, Vidaber Yahweh, so we're here. Hope everybody can see, and I hope everybody can hear. Shabbat Shalom, Ruven in Aviva Skari. Okay, Vidaber Yahweh el Moshe lech ale mizeh, אתה והעם אשר העלית מארץ מצרים אל הארץ אשר נשבעתי לאברהם ליצחק וליעקב לאמור לזרעך אתננה. So leave Mount Sinai, basically. So just again to give a bit more context, we didn't do the golden calf last year, but right. So this is right after the golden calf. Okay, so basically go to the land of Israel. Verse 2. ושלחתי לפניך מלאך וגרשתי את הכנעני האמורי החיתי הפריזי החיובי היבוסי. I'm going to get rid of all these nations that are there, the so-called 7 nations. אל ארץ זבת חלב ודבש כי לא אעלה בקרבך כי עם קשה עורף אתה פן אכלך בדרך. Okay, so I'm not going to go with you. Okay, go to the land of milk and honey, but I'm not going with you anymore. I'm out of here. You people piss me off too much. You've gotten under my skin a couple too many times, especially with this golden calf deal. Okay. I may skip ahead a little bit here. Let me just read. Okay. meeting, ומשה ייקח את האוהל ונתן לו מחוץ למחנה, הרחק מן המחנה וקרא לו אוהל מועד והיה, אוקיי. ויקצה את משה כאוהל, okay. The glory of the Lord. Where did I want? Okay. So 1 second. So getting back to here, we were talking about the journeys. So desert of Sinai. Okay, so I guess from the work I did last year, what this means is, so they're told to get out of here and go to the land of Israel, but they don't leave yet, right? They only leave later in Numbers, okay? So tablets replaced, Lord renews the covenant, the radiant face of Moses. We'll read through this just a little bit again to get some context before we go into this week's Parsha, okay? Verse 1, ויאמר יחווה אל משה, פסל לך שני לוחות אבנים. So Yahweh said to Moshe, carve, psal means basically to, not, it's a more specific word, to make out of stone. How do they translate it here? Cut. Okay, we'll go with cut. Hew. 2 luchot avanim, 2 stone tablets, kirishonim, like the first ones, וכתבתי על לוחות את דברים אשר היו על הלוחות הראשונים אשר שיברת. And I'm going to write the stuff I wrote on the first ones, I'll write them on these second tablets. Okay, verse 2. And we're not going to linger in this chapter. I just want to get some context. ויהי נכון לבוקר והיית, oh shoot. Let's go back. ויהי נכון לבוקר ועלית בבוקר אל הר סיני וניצבת לי שם על ראש ההר. So basically to paraphrase, God says, be ready in the morning, you're going to come up on to the mountain again. Okay? Verse 3, איש לא יעלה עמך, וגם איש אל יירא בכל ההר, יירא בכל ההר, גם הצאן והבקר אל יראו אל מול ההר ההוא. So nobody's to get near the mountain or come up to the mountain. Verse 4, ויפסול שני לוחות אבנים כראשונים, וישקה משה בבוקר, ויעל על הר סיני, כאשר ציווה יחווה אותו, ויקח בידו שני לוחות האבנים. Okay, so basically Moshe hewed these second stone tablets, and then he went up to the top of the mountain. וירד יחווה בענן ויתייצב עמו שם ויקרא בשם יחווה. So God came down, Yahweh came down in the cloud, and Moshe stood there with him and called out B'Shem Yahweh, so called out in the name of Yahweh, meaning, well, we're going to see what it means in the next verse, famous verse, these next 2 verses, okay? وَيَعْvor Yahweh al panao, so Yahweh passed or came in front of him, passed by his face, meaning Yahweh passed by Moshe's face. Wayikra, and this is what Moshe called out, right? And here's the famous statement: Yahweh, Yahweh El Rahum Hanun, Erech Apayim Warav Hesed Wayemet. Noser hesed la'alafim, Noseh awon wapesha, وحتى ونقي لو ينقي بكيد عون أوت على بنيم وعلى بني بنيم أنشلشيم وعلى ربعيم. So Moshe cries out, Yahweh, Yahweh, Rahum Hanun, merciful and kind God, Erech Hapayim, long suffering. What does that mean? Literally, it means, well, very literally, it means long in nose. Okay, but figuratively, that means long before steam starts coming out of God's nose, figuratively, which means it takes a long time to get, it takes a lot to get God angry. He's very patient. He doesn't get angry very easily, but boy, when he does, you better hit the roads, Jack. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Urav Hased V'Emet, and great or full of kindness and truth. Notzer Chesed Alafim, he guards or keeps kindness. We'll translate maybe as remembers kindness for thousands, meaning thousands of generations. Noseh avon v'pesha v'chatat. He bears iniquity and crime and sin, transgression and sin. Okay, meaning he'll take. He's going to put up with a lot. Okay, he'll bear a lot of these burdens. Usually understood as, but he does not completely forgive. In other words, God is going to wait. He's going to be very patient before he punishes. Okay, he'll wait thousands of generations. Okay, if he has to, but if you don't shape up, he's going to ship you out. Okay, so he revisits. Visits, it's a very hard word to translate. We've spoken about this word before. Peked, remembers or brings to mind or decides at a certain time to remember is maybe the best way to explain this word. So he decides at a certain time, remember, recompenses, he pays back when the time is right. Let's go with that translation. Avon avot al banim, this iniquity of the fathers on the sons, or al bnei banim, and on the sons' sons, al sheleshim wa rebeim, until the third and even the fourth generation. So we could sit here and we can get all philosophical about that. You know, why is he going to pay back? Why is God going to pay back the sons and the sons' sons down to the fourth generation for the sins of the fathers? You know, there are many many answers that are offered. And one that's often pointed out is, and pointing to Ezekiel chapter 18, where if the sons repent, then God will actually forget. This only means if they continue in their way. But the point here is to compare it with the kindness, which he remembers for thousands of generations. Okay, he's still remembering his kindness. We're still, we as Israelites / Jews have kind of been jerks to him over the millennia, and yet he still favors us because he's remembering for many, many hundreds of generations the kindness that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Moshe and David did for him. So we're still getting the dividends of that relationship, that love that God had for those patriarchs and that they had for him, and the loyalty and the faith that they had in him. I don't like the word faith, the loyalty that they had towards him. Okay. But so the point is that if he likes somebody, he'll pay back their descendants, even if they do bad. I think is the implication. I think for sure is the implication, right? He'll pay back their descendants for hundreds, thousands of generations. But if they do bad, he'll pay back their descendants only for 3 or 4 generations. In other words, it's a way of pointing out just how merciful God is. So he pays back the good for thousands of generations. The bad he'll pay back, but only for 3 or 4 generations. He's not an angry person who loves, he's not an angry God who loves to punish. He's a kind, merciful God who looks for every excuse in the book to forgive, to forget, and to reward rather than punish. I know sometimes in our lives it doesn't seem that way. Shalom, Phil. Shabbat Shalom. But that is the truth. And sometimes punishment is actually reward. It takes us a little while to figure that out. Okay, so that's the point, that God is extremely kind and merciful. He's not an angry God who likes or looks to punish. He gives every excuse in the book to forgive. Okay. Okay, so that's that famous statement. So Moshe quickly, or after he said that, he quickly bowed down and prostrated onto the floor. Okay, bowed down onto the floor. and then prostrated. Okay. ויאמר אם נא מצאתי חן בעיניך אדוני ילך נא אדוני בקרבנו כי עם קשה עורף הוא וסלחת לעווננו לחטאתנו ונחלתנו. Okay, so remember we saw earlier in the previous chapter that Yahweh, God, basically says, I'm out of here. You guys are jerks. I'm going home, man. I'm sick of you people. Enough, right? Where was that? That was right here. Kilo ale. So basically, get the heck out of Sinai, go to the land of Israel, but I'm not coming with you. Kilo ale b'kirbecha, ki am kashe oref ata pen achelcha b'derech. Okay, I will not go in your midst. I will not go among you. And isn't this ironic? Because the tabernacle was just built, okay, and that's the place where the Israelites. And now he's saying basically, I'm not moving into my home, okay. I'm out of here, okay, because you're a stiff-necked nation, and if I go among you, I might just end up destroying you on the way. So I don't want to do that. It's better I just not even see, right? It's like I remember I actually have a story from when I was in Jerusalem one time, and I went to someone's house for Shabbat, and I was young and full of energy and full of fire, Zionistic fire, and I went to the person's house. And I ended up getting into a fight with one of the guests, not a fist fight, but a really, really heated argument with one of the guests right at this guy's Shabbat table, right? And I'll never remember this. I'll never forget this. It's stuck in my mind to this day. The guy was a very, very special guy. He had actually been a very high-level commander in the IDF during the 1948 war. And he was very upset with the way the country was going, and we'll just leave it at that. It did not end well for him. But at any rate, I was arguing with this guy, and the owner of the house, the Baal Habayit, the person who was running the Shabbat table, obviously thought that I was in the wrong, and he made it clear to me. But I thought he was going to throw me out of the house, okay? But instead, what did he do? He got up. Well, he didn't get up. He was actually in a wheelchair. He wheeled himself out of the house. He just left the house, okay? And it reminds me of this, right? If he'd stayed there, he might have ended up, who knows, yelling at me, screaming at me, maybe punching me in the nose. But he decided rather than do that, he's just going to leave his own house, right? It's the same thing. It's kind of the same thing here. That's what God does, right? He says, I'm out of here because if I stay among you people, it's only a matter of time because before you guys piss me off so much, I'm going to end up destroying you. So it's better I go than sit around and watch what's going on. Anyway, that impressed me to this day that the man walked out of his own house rather than see two of his guests fight. Okay. So, but how do we get onto that? We were right here. So the whole lead up to that is this, or what really is going on here, okay? So Moshe goes up, Moshe carves or hews the new stone tablets, the new 2 stone tablets, goes up to the mountaintop, bows down before God. God has said, Yahweh has already told Moshe or told Israel that he's not going to lead them up to the land of Israel. They're very upset, right? And now Moshe bows down, prostrates himself, and gives this long, basically flatters God, right? Or reminds God, of what type of person, or what type of God he is, a kind, forgiving, loving God, right? And now we get to the point of the whole thing, right? We get to the reason that he does that. He butters up God, basically. I don't want to use butters up because it's such a beautiful phrase and it's such a beautiful interaction here. But Moshe always has an angle, right? God's always out to destroy Israel, and Moshe is always out to save their butts before it's too late. So here, Moshe gets to the point, and that is Vayomer im na mosati hayin me'anecha Adonai. Yelech na Adonai b'kirbenu ki am kashe oref hu v'salachta la'avonenu le'chatatenu u nichatanu. Okay, so I'll translate it word for word here. Okay, so Moshe v'yomer, he said, meaning Moshe said to God, if I have found grace in your eyes, in other words, if you like me, if I'm pleasing to you, Adonai, and here he doesn't call him by his name, he calls him by his title, Adonai, my Lord. Okay. That's in the majestic plural, shall we say? Okay. Yelechna Adonai b'kirbenu. May our Lord, or may my Lord go among us. May he walk among us, meaning may he actually go ahead and accompany us up to the land of Israel. Ki am kashe oref hu, because this is a stiff-necked nation, right? That's exactly what God said right here in Exodus 33. right? God said, I'm not going with you because I'm kashe orefata. You're a stiff-necked nation. So Moshe basically gives him this long speech to soften, I won't say butter him up, to soften him up, right? Saying what a kind and merciful God he is, and reminding him what a kind and merciful God he is. And then he says, where was it? Oh boy. Okay, here it is. Because this is a stiff-necked nation, right? So he's admitting, he's agreeing with God, right? He's using all the tools to kind of, I'm on your side, God. He softens him up. He agrees with him. Yes, it's a stiff-necked nation, but where is usually translated as and, but it doesn't really always mean and. It's kind of in many senses a general conjunction, right? It joins one part to the other. In this case, I would translate it as but or so. So forgive our iniquities and our sins and lead us. Okay. So that's what Moshe asks of God. Okay. The next thing, we have the renewal of the covenant, right? There had been a breach in the covenant already because the Israelites engaged in the worship of the golden calf. And so now we have a renewal of the covenant. Okay, so we're in verse 10. ויאמר הנה אנוכי כורת ברית נגד כל עמך עשה נפלאות אשר לא נבראו בכל הארץ ובכל הגויים וראה כל העם אשר אתה בקרבו. וראה כל העם אשר אתה בקרבו את מעשה יהוה כי נורא הוא אשר אני עושה עמך. So God says, God says to Moses, right, who's still on top of the mountain, behold, I'm gonna cut a covenant in front of all of your people. Okay, I'm gonna do wonders that have never been seen before in all the world. The Chol HaGoyim, or among any of the nations. And the entire people that you are among them, this is God speaking to Moshe, et ma'aseh Yahweh. And I will, and all of these people that you are among them, God speaking to Moshe, will see ma'aseh Yahweh, the actions or the acts of Yahweh kinorahu, because they will be terrible. They will be stupendous. Hu asher ani oseh imach, that which I'm going to do with you. Okay, verse 11. Okay, שמור לך את אשר אנוכי מצווך היום, הנני גורש מפניך את האמורי, הכנעני, החיתי, הפריזי, החיבי, היבוסי. So guard that which I've commanded you today, okay? Because behold, I'm gonna expel, I'm gonna kick out before you the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Okay. There we go. שמר לך פן תכרות ברית ליושב הארץ אשר אתה בא עליך, פן יהיה למוקש בקרבך. And be careful that you don't make any covenant. You're making a covenant with me, God says. Don't make any covenants with the people who live in the land. Okay? פן יהיה למוקש בקרבך. Lest there be a mokesh is a stumbling block. In modern Hebrew, mokesh is a mine, like in a minefield. Okay? But it's usually translated as a stumbling block. Here they translate it as a snare. Okay, there will be a snare or a stumbling block among you, right? So don't make any covenants with the people. Of course, a covenant was made, right, with the Gibeonites by Joshua inadvertently, but we do actually see explicitly that they make a covenant with one of the peoples, the Gibeonites, who dressed up as if they were from a faraway land and said they were coming and they'd heard about the people of Israel and God. And Joshua falls for it and makes a covenant with them. Okay, so that's in the book of Joshua. Ki et mizbachotam titzun wa'et matzevotam tishberun wa'et asherav tichrotun. So what are you going to do instead? You're not going to make a covenant. Okay, rather you're going to destroy their how do you say this? Sometimes the English words just escape me. Their altars. Okay, you're going to smash their altars with matzevotam, their standing pillars. You're going to break with asherav tichrotun, and their asher asherot, you're gonna break. So the asherot were basically trees that were worshipped as fertility gods. Okay, so verse 14. כי לא תשתחווה לאל אחר כי יחווה קנה שמו אל קנה הוא. Because and you should not bow down, or you better so you shall not bow down to any other god. Okay, כי יחווה קנה שמו, because God's Yahweh's name is jealousy. Okay. Or jealous. El Kenahu, he is a jealous God. So it doesn't mean literally, okay? His name, his ineffable name is Yahweh, okay? So we could say his nickname, I think, would be a better way to translate this, okay? It's meant figuratively. It's not his true name. His true name was revealed to Moses, right, as Yahweh. So it doesn't mean that his name is Kana, is jealous or jealousy, right? It's jealous. It means it figuratively. Let's say his nickname is jealous, okay? But it's a way of saying, like, I don't know, if I don't know, what would we say in the modern age? I don't know, my name is, you meet some bully in the schoolyard and you say, I don't know, something stupid. My name is Schwarzenegger, so you better get the heck out of here, or something stupid like that. Okay, well, what God said doesn't mean your name is literally Schwarzenegger. It means, you're drawing a comparison. Same idea here. Okay, verse 15. Pen techrot brit liyoshev haaretz v'zanu acharei Elohem, lest you cut a covenant with the inhabitants of the land and you literally whore. They usually translate it stray. Here they translate it as play the harlot. So whore, right? It implies basically zona is a whore. So you whore after their gods. So if hule Elohem, and you and you sacrifice or you slaughter to their gods, and they call out to you, or he calls out to you, meaning one of the nations, or maybe someone from the nation, and you eat from his sacrifices, from his slaughter sacrifices, right? So you're not to worship their gods, you're not to eat from their sacrifices, you're not to make any covenants with them, you're not to have any interaction with them whatsoever. And in fact, we find out later on that what you are supposed to do is completely destroy them, and that means men, women, children, and even animals, completely gone, not leave a single breathing thing. That's in Deuteronomy chapter 20. Okay, because if you do leave them around, then you're going to interact with them, and that's exactly what happened. Okay, the Israelites did not destroy all the inhabitants of the land, and they indeed became a big problem for them, right? And are to this day. ולקחת מבנותיו לבניך וזנו בנותיו אחרי אלוהיהם, and you'll take from among his daughters, you'll take one of his daughters for your sons, you take their daughters for your sons, I should say. וזנו בנותיו אחרי אלוהיהם, and one second. יזנו את בניך אחרי אלוהיהם. And their daughters will. So in other words, if one of the Israelite sons marries one of these foreign daughters, then those daughters are going to whore themselves after these foreign gods. And they're going to cause your sons to whore themselves, to follow, to whore after these foreign gods. Okay, Elohei masecha lo ta'aselach. Okay, and to sum it up, gods of Masecha implies molten, or as opposed to psalim, which are carved images, carved of wood or stone. These are molten images, right? They're like they're cast, right? The metal is melted down, and then I guess it's put into a mold, and then it's turned into an idol, right? Elohei Masecha lo ta'aselach. Okay, you shall not make any gods of molten gods, or basically metal molten gods. Okay, verse 18. חג המצות תשמור 7 ימים תאכל מצות אשר ציוויתיך למועד חודש האביב כי בחודש האביב יצאת ממצרים. Okay, and now we get on to a little bit about the various different laws. Okay, so this is about the Passover. Kol peter rechem li v'chol miknet tizachar peter shor v'seh peter chamor tifteh b'seh v'im lo tifteh v'rafto kol v'chol banecha tifteh v'lo yera'u panai arikam. So this is what's usually called pidyon haben. Well, at least this is in verse 20. So this is the redemption of the firstborn. Okay. The firstborn belong to God, but you can redeem him at 30 days. At the age of 30 days, you bring him to the priest and you pay 30 shekels. I'd have to look it up again. And you redeem your son from being dedicated to God, because all of the firstborn are essentially dedicated to God. Because the last plague was killing the firstborn of Egypt. When God killed the firstborn of Egypt, he, in return, took the firstborn of all of Israel to himself. But there's an exchange that goes on with the Levites. So the Levites are exchanged for the firstborn. This is done very explicitly and even numbered, right? We'll see that later in Numbers. And so the firstborn are redeemed so that they don't have to be dedicated to God, to Yahweh, and instead the Levites are the ones that are dedicated to Yahweh. Okay, we'll get into this more when we come to those verses. Petach hamor tifteh, and it also involves animals. Okay, so if it's a kosher animal, shall we say, we'll call it kosher, even though that's not a biblical word, but if it's an animal that can be brought as a sacrifice, then the firstborn of every one of those animals is brought as a sacrifice. Okay, if it's not, so here the example is given a hamor, which is a donkey, then it's going to be redeemed with a seh. And the seh is, let's look up our list so we can get it quite specifically. Animal terms. Hold on 1 second, please. Seh, here we go. Seh is one of the flock. It's a male or female of any age. Well, in this case, it would be the firstborn, so it's going to be young. But in general, Seh is of any age, and so if one of the flock means sheep or goats. Okay, so if it's a hamor, if it's a donkey, so you're going to redeem the firstborn of a donkey. Okay, it should be brought up as a sacrifice, but you cannot bring a donkey as a sacrifice because it's an unclean animal. So what you do is you exchange it for a sheep or a goat. So the sheep or the goat would not necessarily be young, right? Because it's not the firstborn. The donkey was the firstborn. Okay, so you can exchange it for a sheep or donkey, and then you bring that sheep. I'm sorry, sheep or a goat, and then you bring that sheep or that goat as a sacrifice, right? You bring the firstborn of the animals to God, and if you don't do that, okay, so that's preferable. It's lichatchila, but if it turns out you can't or don't do that, then your other option, your secondary option, is then you break the neck of the chamor, of that firstborn donkey. In other words, you kill it. Okay. Okay. I want to rush through this because we're going to get into too many side tangents. We already have, but that's okay. All right. Shalom, Ariella and Ben. Shalom, shalom. Okay. Now we get into the Shabbat. Sheshit yamim tavod b'yom hashvi'i tishbot b'harish v'chatzir tishbot. So 6 days you shall work. On the 7th day you shall halt from working. That's the Shabbat. Okay. And here we have a little extra added bonus here. B'harish v'katzir. During plowing time and during harvesting time, you shall halt from working. You shall cease work. Okay. Even if it's the most busy time of the year. Okay. Right. The two busiest times were the harish and the katzir. The beginning of the season when you're plowing and planting the seeds. Actually, I think planting the seeds is done before. At any rate, the plowing time and the harvesting time at the end of the agricultural season, right? That's what Sukkot is. It's Chag HaKatzir. It's the harvesting. It's the harvest festival, right? So even during these times when you would have a lot of work to do, right? Still tishbot. Still on the 7th day you take the day off. Okay. To put this in modern terms, it would be like saying, okay, even if you have so much stuff to do at work that you should be working weekends, you still don't work on the Shabbat. Okay, even during crunch time, you don't work on Shabbat. Okay, Verse 22, V'chag Shavuot ta'aseh lecha bikurei katsir chitim v'chag asif tkufat hashana. So this is Chag Shavuot. This is Shavuot, which is the next big holiday, the only holiday, the only biblical holiday right after Passover or right after Passover. And ta'aseh lecha bikurei katsir chitim. So this points out what we should all know, that Shavuot is the first fruits, is the holidays not celebrating or commemorating the first fruits of the wheat harvest. Okay, so Passover is the first fruits of the barley harvest. Shavuot is the first fruits of the wheat harvest, and then Sukkot is the ingathering, is the harvest festival when everything is brought in. That's when the summer fruits or the summer and fall fruits are brought in. So Passover is associated with the barley harvest. Shavuot is associated with the wheat harvest, and then Sukkot is associated with the harvest of all of the fruits, such as the olives, the figs, the dates, the pomegranates, the grapes. I think I got all four. I think I got them all. I might have left one out. I don't think so. Okay, verse 23. Shalosh pamim b'shana yereh kol zechorcha et pnei ha'adon Yahweh Elohei. I think I'm going to skip ahead here because, again, this is not relevant. This is not our parsha, and I really want to go. I want to skip through. Okay, all right. Let's go down to here. So the radiant face of Moses. So Moses gets all these laws, most of which have to do, if we look here, from about, where is it? From here. So first we get about, don't make a covenant with the inhabitants of the nations, destroy their altars and their standing stones and their asherot. Actually, asherav it says there. And here we get a whole bunch of agricultural laws, shall we say, for the most part. Okay. And then we get to verse 27. Okay. יאמר יחווה אל משה כתב לך את הדברים האלה כי על פי הדברים האלה קראתי איתך ברית ועת ישראל. So then Yahweh says to Moshe, write all of these things down. Write what things down? Okay. Well, let's see. One second. Where does it start? Okay, we could maybe start here, right? Around here. Okay. So these are the things that God told Moshe on this day. Okay, all of these things. And then Yahweh says to Moshe, "Ktav lecha et advarim ha'ele, ki al pi advarim ha'ele karati itcha brit wa'et Yisrael." Yahweh says to Moshe, write for you all of these things, because according to these things, I've made with you, or I've cut with you a covenant with you and with Israel. Okay, so what does that mean? Write all of these things down. Write on what? Okay, well, that's kind of a tough one. That would take a little bit of study, but we know that Moshe went up with the two stone tablets, okay, and two empty stone tablets, and then God says, write all this stuff down, right? Today, the stuff I've told you today, and this is the stuff he told. So does that mean that all of this stuff is what was written down on those two new empty tablets, not the 10 Commandments, but this stuff? Well, let's see. We'll keep that with an open mind, and we'll see what happens. Okay, verse 28. Well, there's our answer, right? Okay. So on the two tablets that Moshe had brought up, he wrote the Aseret HaDvarim. That's the 10 Commandments that we saw back in Exodus 20. All right. So where was all of this stuff written down? Okay. I don't know. That's actually a big question, and we'd have to look at some of the commentaries and get some ideas and study a little bit more, right? But on the two tablets that God made, it says here explicitly that Moshe was up there for 40 days and 40 nights, and he wrote the 10 Commandments down on those two tablets. Okay, all right. Again, this is not our parsha, so I'm not going to go too deep into it right now. Let's go on. Verse 29. Moshe ברידתו מן ההר ומשה לא ידע כי קרן אור מפניו אור פניו בדברו איתו. So Moshe came down and he had the two tablets, שני לוחות העדות, the two tablets of the testimony, meaning the two tablets with the 10 commandments written on them. ומשה לא ידע כי קרן אור מפניו, that light was shining, was beaming out of his face. Okay, so I could go into why Karan means to beam. Let's say they translate it here. Shine.
The statues of Moses with horns.
Right, I was about to say that. Okay, but a keren is also a horn. Okay, in fact, it is the same. It literally means horned, light horned out of his face, right? Because the shape of a beam is like the shape of a horn. Okay, so it was misunderstood by I don't know who, anti-Semites over the years. I'm not sure where in history. I can't remember exactly offhand, but this is where the anti-Semites, or shall we say the non-Israelites, many non-Israelites got the idea that Moses had horns on his head, and by extension that Jews have horns on their heads. They get it from this verse here. Okay, verse 30. Yar Aaron v'chol bnei Yisrael et Moshe v'hine qaran or panav v'yir'u migeshet alav. So Aaron and all the children of Israel saw that Moshe had light beaming or horning out of his head, out of his face, and they feared to even approach him. Verse 31, Vayikra aleh Moshe v'yashuvu elav Aaron v'chol ha'nisi'im b'ida v'yidaber Moshe elehem. And Moshe calls to them, and Aaron and all of the Hanisi'im, the heads of the community, come back because they were afraid. They ran away from him basically because he had beams of light coming out of his head. He must have looked like something out of a sci-fi movie. And they came back to him. Verse 32. Acharei chen nikshu kol bnei Yisrael mitzavim et kol asher diber Yahweh ito b'har Sinai. And then all of the children of Israel came, and Moshe commanded them everything that God had told him on Mount Sinai. Remember, Moshe had been gone now for 40 days, right? He came back down with a new ark, or new 10 commandments on 2 stone tablets, and apparently a bunch of other laws that he wrote down somewhere, but not on those 2 stone tablets. And then Moshe finished speaking. Moshe finished speaking to them, and he placed on his face a masveh. The masveh is like a veil. Verse 34. בבואו משה לפני יחווה לדבר איתו יסיר את המסווה עד צאתו יצא ודיבר אל בני ישראל את אשר יצווה. So Moshe, when he would go in to speak to Yahweh in the tent of meeting, would take off the veil. When he came back out to speak to Israel, he put the veil back on. Verse 35. וראו בני ישראל את פני משה כי קרן אור פני משה וישיב משה את המסווה על פניו עד בואו לדבר איתו. So basically, it summarizes that idea. It's summarizing all of this stuff, okay? By saying that Moshe put the veil on when he spoke to God, and he took it off when he spoke to Israel. Okay, so now we get to our parsha. This is Exodus 35, and so now we can slow down a little bit more. We can get into some commentary a bit more. Just give me a second. I'm going to go grab a bit of water. Bottles. Okay, so we're now in Exodus 35, okay? And we dig right in with verses that are extremely important to Karaism, okay? And to the way that Karaites interpret the Torah. So let's start here. Oops. Okay, Vayakhel Moshe et kol adat bnei Yisrael. Moshe called together or gathered together all of the adat bnei Yisrael. So adat is usually translated as congregation, but that's not really a good that is not really a good translation. So I had a list of translations. I think I put that there. Translations. What are we calling Adat? Aidah, the witnessing community. So yeah, we did this. We spoke about this last year. Okay. So Aidah is usually translated as congregation. Okay. So congregation means con means together, and gregation, I guess, means like aggregate, like gather. So a gathering together. Okay. But that's not what the underlying Hebrew word means. So the Hebrew word is Aidah. And we looked it up last year. I'll just read this again. Oops. There we go. So Aidah, I should just do this. No, that's okay. So Aidah, we're talking about this line over here, just to make it clear. Okay. So it could come from either the root Aid. So Aid means a witness, or Ya'ad. Ya'ad means a goal or a destination. Requires further investigation. For this translation, we've assumed the former. Okay. So I think when we investigated last year, we saw that the word Aidah could come from either Aid, meaning witness, or Ya'ad, meaning destination, which is where we get the word Mu'aid, which means appointed time. It's usually translated. At any rate, when we investigated last year, we saw that it was more likely that comes from the word Aid. So Ha'aidah really means the witnessing community. That kind of sounds a little bit too Christian for me. So maybe I'll try to come up with another word. Maybe I'll just call it congregation, but really we should understand that what this means is Ha'aidah means it basically means the Jehovah's Witnesses, the ones who are witnessing to God's greatness. Okay. Maybe testimony would be another one. The testimony community, testify. I don't know. I'd have to come up with that one. But I just do want to point out that the word does not really mean congregation. It doesn't mean a coming together. It means a community of witnesses to the covenant, or witnesses to the greatness of Yahweh. Okay. So Moshe gathered together all of this community. Let's just call it that. Witnessing community. The witnessing community of the children of Israel. These are the things which Yahweh commanded to do them. And now we get into basically just one law before we get into the tabernacle. Okay? But it's a doozy. Okay? So Sheshet Yamim ta'aseh minacha u'biyom hashvi'i ye'eh lachem kodesh Shabbat Shabbaton Yahweh Kol Ha'oseh Bo Milacha Imat. Okay, so for 6 days. Excuse me, just drink for a second. So this is the Shabbat, right? 6 days you should do milacha, you should do work. B'yom hashvi'i yelechem kodesh, and on the seventh day, Yelechem Kodesh, it shall be a holy day. Okay, Shabbat Shabbaton. It is a they usually translate it as solemn day of rest. Okay, because you have a repetition here. Okay, so the repetition here is, we've said many times, repetition in the Torah means emphasis, right? So a lot of times it's translated as solemn day of rest. You could also say Shabbat is actually the name of the holiday, the proper name. So it means a Shabbat, and a Shabbaton means a day of rest. So you could also translate it as it is a holy day, the Shabbat, which is a day of rest. Okay, Le Yahweh, Yahweh, Yahweh Kol Ha'oseh Bo Melacha Yumat. Anyone who does work, and we'll translate that as unnecessary work during that day, shall be put to death. Okay. And then we have in verse 3, Lo tiva'aru esh b'chol moshvotechem b'yom Shabbat, and do not cause a fire, or do not kindle a fire, do not burn a fire throughout all of your habitations on the day of the Shabbat. Okay, we've spoken about this a lot in the past. This is a key verse for Karaism. Okay, because the typical Karaite interpretation of this verse is that before the Shabbat comes in, all fire should be put out. Okay, whereas the rabbis, to make a long story short, what they say is that as long as the fire was lit before the Shabbat came in and it's not touched, then it can be left burning. Okay, and we've spoken about this extensively. And I should point out, perhaps in the meantime, that I did write an article about Shabbat, and I'll link it. The link here describes a lot of my points of view. Oh, she can't be in here. She's driving me crazy. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, go get her and put her outside. Okay, go get her and put her outside.
The door's open.
Well, then close it. So here it is. I'll post the link. Okay. In context, I don't know how much I want to spend on it right now, but to make a long story short, that if we put everything together, what the standard Karaites usually interpret this verse to mean is that before Shabbat comes in, all fires are to be put out. Okay, so the standard Karaites, what I'll call the Egyptian Karaites, a true observant Egyptian Karaite will not allow any fire to burn at all. Come here. Go. Go outside. Go. Come here. Come here. 1 second. Oh, come. See you later. Have fun. So a truly observant Egyptian Karaite would not allow any fire to be lit at all once the Shabbat comes in. In other words, if there were any fires being lit, they would put them out. Needless to say, I think that's extreme. Okay? For reasons I've stated many times in the past. But before I talk about that, let me point out also that the Egyptian Karaites also take it to a ridiculous extreme. And what they do is, because of this and other similar verses, it says that you should not do any milacha, you should not do any work on the Shabbat. Exactly, good point, right? There's no exception for the menorah that is to stay lit. It's not all the time, it's from the night until the morning, but there's no exception for the Shabbat, right? So what the rabbis would say in response to that is, well, that's the Beit HaMikdash. That gets special dispensation. That doesn't apply to the Beit HaMikdash. That's their typical answer. Okay, but you have pointed out one of the problems. Okay, so what was I going to say? Right. So the Egyptian Karaites, I just want to point out what the Karaite view is here. So we have the two things that are usually understood as the restrictions for Shabbat: no milacha, okay, and not lighting a fire. Okay, and the rabbis subsume not lighting a fire into milacha. They consider it a form of milacha, which I'll get to my opinion in a second regarding that. Where the Egyptian Karaites considered, I guess, basically two different things. No, I guess they would also consider lighting a fire also a form of milacha. They might consider it different. It doesn't really matter. Practically speaking, what that means is not only will they put out all fires that have been burning once the Shabbat comes in, but they'll go much further than that to a ridiculous extreme, which is so extreme that it actually makes them, in my opinion, look foolish and stupid and is not a good, and for anyone who witnesses it, as I have, does not give a very good impression of the Torah of Moses, and that is they interpret this as not only are you not allowed to do work on Shabbat, but you're not allowed to have anyone else do work for you. Which I can also address what my view is on that. I don't think that's so clear either. But not only that, but you're not allowed to have anything do work for you either. So what they will actually do is they will unplug all of their electrical appliances and I don't think many Karaites do this anymore. I don't know how many ever did it, but the most extreme ones will unplug all of their electrical appliances. Not only will they put out all fires, they'll unplug all of their electrical appliances before the Shabbat comes in, okay? Because nothing, no one and nothing is allowed to be doing work on behalf of a Jew or a Karaite in their eyes on the Shabbat. Okay, so let's think about that for a second. What does that mean, unplug all your electrical appliances? Well, that includes the refrigerator, okay? So what they will do is they'll unplug their refrigerators. Again, I'm not sure exactly how many of the 30 to 50,000, it's usually the number that's bandied around, of Egyptian Karaites there are, or call them standard or Egyptian Karaites, but I don't know if I don't think it's very many who really do it, actually. But let's say it's a couple of hundred. They'll unplug their refrigerators before Shabbat comes in, okay? What does that mean? Let's say it's August in Israel, and it's the entire weekend it's going to be like 98 degrees, or high of like 104 degrees with a low of like 72. That's not good for the food, for the chicken and the beef and all this kind of stuff. So they'll actually pack the freezer or the refrigerator, or however, they'll pack the whole thing with ice to keep it cold, and it is a disgusting mess, I must say. I know that before the refrigerators there were ice boxes, but I think the ice was on the bottom, not on top. So when it dripped out the bottom. Well, what I saw with my own eyes in the Karaite synagogue in Jerusalem was they would pack the freezer part, the top, and the water would just like drip all over the place, and sometimes they'd forget to turn it back on. And when we came there, usually to learn on Thursday, it was just a disgusting mess, I have to say. At any rate, that's taking things to an extreme. That doesn't make any sense, in my opinion, at all. So I actually tend to agree more with the rabbis in their interpretation, okay, for reasons I've gone into a lot in the past. It wouldn't make sense not to, at the very least, keep a fire burning once Shabbat comes in, because everyone thinks of Israel as a really hot desert, but that's not the case. Okay, it depends on the season and it depends on the location. Okay, if you live near the Lebanese border, let's say in the Golan Heights, a high elevation in the Golan Heights, or even in Tzfat or north of Tzfat, in the mountainous northern region of Israel, then you're going to get a lot of snow in the wintertime. The temperatures can easily be down in the 30s, the 20s, even the teens, maybe even lower on the higher elevations. And it's not going to be a very, very pleasant at all. Even in Jerusalem in January and February, can many times, it's usually, I would say, the low temperatures down in the low 40s or something like that. But it can easily be in the 30s. And in some cases, it snows. Maybe once every 2 years or so, it snows in Jerusalem. It can get down into the 20s. I think the lowest temperature ever recorded in Jerusalem was also something like 15. So it can get quite cold. And if you don't have some kind of heat, then you are not going to be having a very pleasant Shabbat. So it just does not make a logical sense at all. The Egyptian Karaite view of the whole thing. Okay, I would also say that the rabbinical view, although less extreme, also doesn't make any sense for the same reason I said. So let's say you and some Karaites will interpret the verses this way. They'll light the fire before Shabbat, and then they'll just let it go into Shabbat. And when it goes out, it goes out. Well, that's not a lot of fun either, because if it goes out 2 hours later or even the next day, in the morning, it's still pretty darn cold, and you're going to have a very, very miserable Shabbat if it's cold out, okay? So I don't think the rabbinical way makes any sense either. So the rabbis, once they have the advent of electricity, then that changed the game for them, because then they can they can just leave it on before Shabbat comes in. It doesn't go out, right? Electricity can keep going the entire Shabbat, or they can put their automatic timers on, and so they can have proper temperature. They can have their little hot plates going to cook their food, etc., etc. But I think the rabbinical view is too extreme as well, and I'll tell you what I think this means specifically here. Okay, lo tivaru esh b'chol moshvatechem b'yom haShabbat. So it's been pointed out that this is perhaps there's been grammatical analysis of this, right? So does this mean, is this what's called the intensive form of the verb, the pi'el? Is this the causative form of the verb, what's called the hifil? So if it's the intensive form of the verb, also maybe called the transitive, okay, then you should then it could mean it could mean, well, let's start with the causative. Okay, if it's the causative form, this might mean you cannot allow fire to burn on the Shabbat. Okay, so they usually interpret that as meaning that you must turn off the fire before it comes in. If it's the intensive form, the transitive form, so maybe we translate that as you should not allow fire to burn on the Shabbat. Whereas the first one was you should not cause fire to burn on the Shabbat. Then they interpret that to mean that you can allow the fire to continue once the Shabbat comes in, but you can't light any new fires. Okay, so there's a lot of grammatical analysis that's done of this verse to try to point out or to try to figure out what it means. I don't really think it matters. Okay, whether it's the transitive / intensive form of the verb or whether it's the causative form of the verb. I think the way to understand this verb, this verse or this commandment is a little bit different. I think what it means is, and I've spoken many times before about why I think so. Okay, that really the only prohibition on Shabbat is you're not supposed to do unnecessary work. Okay, the idea of not doing melacha on the Shabbat is that you're supposed to get everything ready the day before. Or the days before, right? The day before. In Second Temple period times, they call that preparation day, right? So on preparation day, on Friday, you're supposed to get everything ready so that everything's set, so you can rest on the Shabbat. You don't have much to do, okay? Obviously, there are going to be some things that you need to do, okay? When I get up in the morning on Shabbat, okay, I still need to make my bed. I still need to comb my hair. I need to put my clothes on. I need to feed the animals, the cats. Okay, there's certain milacha that must be done on Shabbat. Okay, there's no choice. Okay, you can't just lie in bed all day long, right? There's a certain amount of work that has to be done on Shabbat. The idea is it should be kept to a minimum. As much as possible that can be prepared the day before should be prepared the day before, so that you only do the bare minimum on Shabbat. Okay, and so I think that's the only prohibition on Shabbat. Okay, I like to translate it as do not do any unnecessary work on the seventh day. Okay, so then what is this about not lighting a fire? Okay, I think as we see so many times in the Torah will give a law and then it might give an example or it might illustrate what that law means. And I think what this really is an illustration of the law of Shabbat, which is not to do any melacha. Okay, and what I think, my personal opinion is that this verse over here is giving the prime example of what would have been work in ancient times that you would be doing on Shabbat had you not prepared the day before, and that would be taking care of a fire. Okay, so I think the way to understand these two verses, and I'll read them again. Okay, verse 2, Sheshit Yamim Taseh Melacha. So for 6 days you can do any work you need to. B'yom hashvi'i yelechem kodesh, and on the seventh day should be for you a holy day. Shabbat Shabbaton, a Shabbat day of resting, or a most restful day, Yahweh, to Yahweh. Okay, Kol haoseh bo melacha yumat. Anyone who does on it any unnecessary work should be put to death. Okay, for instance, lo tivaru eish b'kol moshvatecha miyom Shabbat, including doing any work necessary, any unnecessary work necessary for preparing a fire. Okay, so this is an example, in my opinion, or perhaps a prime example. Verse 3 is a prime example of what is meant by work that should be refrained from on Shabbat. Okay, and it's not meant to be taken as a separate mitzvah, as a separate commandment. It's meant to be taken as an example, perhaps the prime example of the type of work that should not be done on Shabbat. So what does that mean, practically speaking, in my opinion? Okay, well, over the years, what I've come to believe, and this may change in the future, it's certainly developed over time. What I've come to believe at this point in time is what this means is not that you have to blow out all your fires before Shabbat comes in, not that you have to turn off all your electricity before Shabbat comes in, okay? And by the way, melacha means you're not supposed to do melacha, okay? Things can do work for you as long as it doesn't require your intervention, right? The chance, okay, when I keep my refrigerator going over Shabbat, That doesn't require any intervention on my part, right? I don't have to do anything to keep the refrigerator going. It doesn't require any melacha, any work from me to keep the refrigerator going. So I'm the one prohibited from doing melacha, not the refrigerator. Okay, so I can have machines working for me on Shabbat as long as they don't require any melacha on my part, right? So if I had, let's say, I don't know, a sewing machine, right? Well, that requires work on my part, right? Because I have to go down there and I have to sit there and I have to, use the sewing machine. Okay, that would be my melacha. That would be a machine that would require melacha from me. It doesn't matter that the sewing machine is doing something. It matters that it requires me to do work, right? But a refrigerator doesn't require any work on my part, right? Minimal work, right? I have to open the door, close the door. That's about it. What I was going to say is that also applies to people. Okay, there are certain people that are restricted from working on the Shabbat, and we get various lists of those people. Okay, for instance, in Exodus chapter 20, in the Ten Commandments, there are a number of different lists, but this covers the basic ones. Okay, so here we have in these verses, this is the fourth commandment. Okay, Shabbat. One second. So, and we see here, well, I'll just read it. Zachoret Yom HaShabbat Lekadsho. Remember the day of the Sabbath day to make it holy. Sheshit Yamim Tavod Vasita Kol Melachtecha. For 6 days you may work and do all of everything you need to do, all of your necessary work. Verse 10. V'yom HaShvi'i Shabbat Yahweh Elohecha. But on the seventh day is a Shabbat, is our day of rest for Yahweh, your God. Okay. Lo taseh kol melacha. You shall not do any unnecessary work. And here I'm putting in again the word unnecessary. Who? Ata, you. Bincha ubitcha, ubitecha, your son and your daughter. Avdecha ve'amatecha, your manservant and your woman, and your male servant and your female servant, your slaves, basically. Okay. V'emtecha, and your animals. Okay. V'gercha asher b'sharecha, and the convert, usually translated as sojourner, but I'll use the modern parlance, the person who comes to live permanently among you, right? Basically a convert to Judaism, okay? Notice that all of the people, or all of the types of people that are delineated in this list, your son, your daughter, your manservant, your maidservant, your animals, okay, and the ger and the convert, they are permanent members of your household, or one could say in the case of the ger, permanent members of the nation of Israel, okay? But they're permanent members of your household, okay? There are other types, or there are other delineations or definitions or statuses of people that are mentioned in various places in the Torah, such as, for instance, the Toshav. Toshav is, to the best of my understanding, after studying it for many years, it means basically a kind of a seasonal worker, right? Like someone who might come during harvest season to work for like a Mexican grape picker. Sorry to be, I don't mean that to be racist in any way, but that's the reality in the southern United States. A lot of Mexicans will come during harvest season during grape harvest season or whatever harvest to pick grapes, and then when they're done, they go back to Mexico. They get a temporary work visa for a couple months, and then, well, actually, they don't go back to Mexico anymore. But they used to go back to Mexico. Now they stay. So that would be a toshav. There's also a sachir. A sachir is basically a day laborer. Okay, we have a commandment in the Torah that you should not lo talin tzchar sachir ad boker. I think I'm quoting that word for word. That the salary of a day worker should not remain with you until the morning. Meaning, if it's a day worker, you pay him that same day. Okay, so that's someone who's just kind of basically, again, a temporary stay. So maybe toshav. Okay, so the way I always like to explain it, okay, is a ger, which we translate usually as a sojourner or a convert. That's someone who has been naturalized into the nation of Israel, right? It's like someone, again, to use an American analogy, someone who comes from a different country and eventually gains American citizenship. Okay, a toshav is someone who has a green card. Okay, so someone who, and I'm sorry, a toshav would be someone who lives permanently in among the nation of Israel, but who has not been naturalized, right? Maybe they haven't circumcised maybe they haven't adopted. They haven't officially become part of the nation of Israel, but they're living for an extended time in the nation of Israel. Okay, so that would be like a green card holder. A sahir would be a day laborer or a temporary laborer. That would be, I'm sorry, I said it wrong. That would be the one who is like a seasonal laborer who's going to get paid on a day-to-day basis. So that would be someone who has a temporary work visa, right, to stay for 2 months or 3 months or whatever the case may be. So these are all different statuses, okay? And then we have also a nilwe, and we also have a nechar, which I'm not going to get into right now. These are people outside of the actual nation of Israel, outside of the land of Israel, okay? But we notice that it's the ger. Where was it? Exodus 20. It's the ger who is basically a naturalized citizen, right? Who is basically a citizen of the nation of Israel, okay? Who is prohibited from working on the Shabbat, but it doesn't say anything about the toshav and the sachir. It doesn't say anything about the green card holder, and it doesn't say anything about the person on the temporary work visa, right? The work visa, the B2 visa holder. I don't know, it's B2. I've never had to get a visa for the United States of America, but the seasonal or the temporary worker, right? They're not prohibited from working on the Shabbat because they're not a permanent nation of Israel. They're not an Israeli citizen, so to speak, right? They're not like an American naturalized citizen or an Israeli naturalized citizen, right? So all of these people, the son, the daughter, they're part of your household, right? They're a permanent part of your household. You're responsible for them in your household, okay? The manservant and the maid servant, male and female servant or slave, they're a permanent part of your household. They're part of your household, okay? The animals are a permanent part of your household, okay? These are all distinctions of people who are part of your household. And by the way, when it says bincha, bitcha, bitecha, your son and your daughter, it's talking about before they go off and get married and start their own household. Actually, it's only the son that starts his own household. The daughter becomes part of that of the household of the man that she married. Okay, married. So we're talking about sons and daughters who are still living in your household. So these are all permanent members of your household. Okay, the ger is a permanent naturalized citizen of Israel. He's a permanent member of the nation of Israel. He's there to stay. Okay. The gercha sher b'sharecha, who lives in your cities or among you. Okay. So those are the ones who are prohibited from working from Shabbat on the Shabbat. Okay, the regional or the seasonal worker, the one who's there for a temporary period, who has the green card. Okay, I'm sorry, the sachir who has the seasonal work visa, and the toshav who has a green card. He's wants to become perhaps someday a permanent citizen of Israel, but he is not yet. They're not restricted from working on the Shabbat. They're not a permanent part of your household. They're not a permanent part of the nation of Israel. Okay, so they're not prohibited from doing milacha on the Shabbat. So even they can work on the Shabbat for you. Okay, as long as it doesn't require work on your part, because you yourself, as an Israelite, if you're an Israelite, you're prohibited from doing work on the Shabbat. So you and all the permanent members of your household and all the permanent members of the nation of Israel are prohibited from working on the Shabbat. Anyone else, anyone passing through, a day laborer, someone who's a seasonal worker, someone who has a green card but yet quote unquote green card but has not yet been naturalized, they are not prohibited from working on the Shabbat. So you could even have them work for you on the Shabbat as long as it doesn't require any input from you. Okay. As long as it doesn't require you to, let's say, supervise them, right? So if I hire sorry to use again the example of the Mexican day laborer, but that is Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Jeffrey Anderson and Ethan Avior. I'm sorry to use the example, but a common example in the United States, right? So if let's say, okay, and it was harvest season, and I hired a bunch of Mexicans to come up and help me during harvest season, and then after 3 months, they're going to go back down to Mexico. Unlikely in this day and age, but let's, we can dream. We could be dreamers that they're going to go back down to Mexico. But I am allowed to have them work on the Shabbat as long as I don't have to stand there and supervise them or tell them what to do or have any work on my part that requires them to do their job, right? If I just say to them, listen, tomorrow is my day off, Saturday is my day off, you guys know what to do already, go do your thing, okay, and we'll talk on Sunday. That's fine in my opinion, because they're not permanent members of your household. They're not permanent members of the nation of Israel, so they don't get or need the protections of the Shabbat, because they're going to go back to their own nation eventually anyway, and then it's their deal over there, whatever their nation does, right? So they're just here temporarily, and they can leave whenever they want. Okay. Okay. So that being said, getting back now to Exodus chapter 35, where were we? Right. So So that was to point out that those are the groups. Anyone who's a permanent member of your household or permanent member of the nation of Israel, in my opinion, not in my opinion, clearly cannot work on the Shabbat on pain of death. And anyone who's not, okay, the green card holder, the temporary visa holder, and anyone outside the land/nation of Israel completely is not prohibited from working on the Shabbat, not by the Torah anyway. So that's the first thing. Okay, so things can work for you. So the Egyptian Karaites who unplug the refrigerator before the Shabbat comes in are ridiculous, in my opinion. It's embarrassing, actually, in my opinion, to interpret the Torah in such a stupid way. Sorry, but that's the truth. And even the rabbis who say that you can't that you can light a fire on Shabbat, but you can't touch it once the Shabbat comes in, I think are wrong, and I'm going to get to that right now. Okay. So we saw the types of people that cannot do Milachah on Shabbat. Now, what can you not do? Okay, so we said that, in my opinion, so first of all, it says Milachah. You're not allowed to do Milachah on the Shabbat on pain of death. Okay, so what does that mean? I always like to translate that, as I mentioned a bunch of times now, as unnecessary work. There's some things you just have to do on Shabbat. I have to feed the cats on Shabbat. There's no choice. Okay, in the summertime, where I live, and it gets to be 105 degrees for 5 days in a row and bone dry. If I don't water the garden, then the vegetables are all, and I rely heavily on vegetables because I do not like to buy fruits and vegetables in the supermarket as much as I can avoid it. I like to grow my own food. If I don't water the vegetable garden, the plants are all going to die. Okay, I have no choice. I have to do that on Shabbat. I keep it to a minimum. It takes me maybe 10 minutes. But I have to, okay? And other things along those lines. I have to put my clothes on when I get out of bed in the morning on Shabbat. I have to make my bed because I don't like my room a mess, okay? All of these are examples of things that have to be done on Shabbat, okay? So what about paying them for the service? Of course, you have to pay them for the service. They're not going to work for free, okay? But you don't do it on the Shabbat, okay? If you have a day laborer, okay, you say, listen, you do your thing. I'll pay you on Sunday. Yeah. For sure, you pay them for their service. The problem that I used to see in Israel is this. So here's a big problem that I used to see in Israel. They wouldn't just pay They wouldn't just pay non-Jews. So Arabs, in my opinion, are not part of the nation of Israel. When I say Arabs, I mean that loosely, right? As many people pointed out to me, or one person in particular, they're not really Arabs. They're, what do you like to call them, folk? Arabized Levantines, some Arabs, God knows what they are, right? A mix of people. The people that live, the non-Jews that live in the land of Israel, within the state of Israel, they can work on the Shabbat. They're not, in my opinion, restricted by the laws of the Shabbat because they're not part of the nation of Israel, not by any way, shape, or form. Okay, so let's say you have they might what we'll call an Arab. Okay. You can say to them, you could say to them on Friday, hey, Ahmed, can you, I don't know, fix my shed, I don't know, that's a mile away on Shabbat, and then I'll pay you on Sunday. No problem. Okay. That's a non-Israelite. So they're not restricted from working on the Shabbat. Okay. That was what I was referring to, what day to pay. That's between you and the worker. Okay. I forgot what I was saying. I lost my train of thought. The point is that the ones who are restricted from, I was saying that we can't do any unnecessary work on the Shabbat. So milachah should be understood as unnecessary work. There's a certain minimal amount of work that has to be done on the Shabbat because we're human beings. We live in the physical world. There's just certain stuff that has to be done on the Shabbat. But as much as possible should be prepared the day before, and the amount of work that's being done on the Shabbat should be kept to an absolute minimum. Okay? And so here, verse 3, Lo tivaru esh b'chol moshvatechem b'yom Shabbat. Do not kindle or burn a fire throughout all your habitations on the Shabbat day. I don't think is meant to be taken as most people understand it. I think this is meant to be given as an example of milachah. Again, that the only prohibition on Shabbat is doing unnecessary work. And here would be a prime example of unnecessary work or work that can be prepared mostly the day before, but if you're not careful, you'll end up having to do it on Shabbat, and that is lighting a fire. Okay, so let's talk about ancient days, or we don't even have to talk about ancient days. Let's talk about going camping without a generator, not glamping. Okay, you're just going camping out in the tent somewhere, and it's cold at night, right? Or even during the day. Let's say in the early morning it's cold, right? You need to have a fire going. Okay, well, anyone who's gone camping, and I hope that's all of us at least once, you know that it requires a lot of effort to get a fire going. You've got to go out, you've got to gather the firewood. We'll talk about that in a second. You've got to bring it back to camp. You have to cut it, you have to chop it, you have to break it up, you have to stack it, and then you have to start your fire, right? You have to light the little twigs, get it going, et cetera, right? That's a lot of work, right? You don't want to be doing that on the Shabbat, on your day of rest. That's not very restful, okay? Going out, gathering wood, chopping it up, bringing it back, getting the fire started, all that kind of stuff. So what do? You do all of that stuff on Friday, okay? And then, let's say, we'll give a little bit to the rabbis. You light the fire on Friday night before the Shabbat comes in. And then throughout the Shabbat, you're allowed to keep it going. You're allowed to throw another log on the fire to keep it going. Or if it goes out, you're allowed to relight it. Now that becomes necessary work on the Shabbat, right? It might even be a matter of life or death, depending on what the temperature is, or if you have a little baby house or something like that. Okay? So you're allowed to do what is necessary on the Shabbat, but the point is you have everything as much as possible set up once the Shabbat comes in. You've already gathered all your wood. You've already chopped up all your wood. You have all the wood ready near the fireplace or near the campfire, or whatever the case may be, ready to go, so you can just chuck another log on it, and you don't have to go out, gather wood, chop wood, all of this stuff on the Shabbat. That's what verse 3, in my opinion, is talking about. It's talking about a prime example of what would have constituted milacha on the Shabbat, and therefore what is prohibited on the Shabbat and should be done on the day before. Okay? You're welcome, Ruben and Aviva. Okay? So how does this translate into the modern age? Okay? It doesn't take any effort in the modern age to light a fire. We have something called stoves. Okay, you can go over there and you flip a switch and the fire comes on. That's not milacha. Okay, so you can light your stove. You can start your stove on the Shabbat. I do it every Shabbat. I make coffee. Okay, actually I don't use a stove. I use an electrical heating element or heating thingy. Kumkum. I don't know how they call it in English. And during the Shabbat, for Friday night dinner, I like to have candles. So I'll light candles. I'll use a lighter and I'll light candles. That doesn't require any milacha on my part, right? The issue for Shabbat is milacha. It's not lighting a fire. The verse, Exodus 35, verse 3, is, in my strong opinion, and again I say my strong opinion because it is a bit complicated, but this is what I've come to believe over the years. Verse 3 is basically just giving us an example of what would generally, or what could potentially cause us to do a lot of milacha on the Shabbat, and therefore all of the milacha associated with that prime act of survival, keeping a fire going over the Shabbat, should be done the day before, so that way the amount of work that's done on Shabbat is kept to an absolute minimum. Okay? Any questions, any comments? And I'll give you a couple of proofs of why I think this is the case in a second. Okay? So really the only prohibition is verse 2. Verse 3 is just an illustration of the prohibition laid out in verse 2. Okay? Anybody want to agree, disagree, comment? Shomer Shabbos? Somebody wrote. Okay, well, if you do, feel free to. I'm always trying to refine and, my opinion. But this is what I've come to believe over the years. And I'll give a couple of proofs. I think there are many proofs. So first of all, my first proof is that this issue of fire is never, ever, ever mentioned anywhere, not only in the rest of the Torah, in the entire Tanakh. There is no other mentioned anywhere of the prohibition of fire on the Shabbat. Shabbat is mentioned a bunch more times in the Torah itself. Fire, the prohibition of fire, is never mentioned. Shabbat is mentioned a number of times in the Tanakh, such as in the book of Jeremiah, such as in the book of Nehemiah. Okay, fire is never mentioned. There is no other mention. This is the only verse. Exodus 35:3 is the only verse in the entire Tanakh where the prohibition of fire on the Shabbat is mentioned. Okay, so if it were so important, right? And not only is it important, but for the rabbis and even for the Egyptian Karaites, it's become a central tenet of Shabbat, right? No fire, bad, right? Excuse me. If it were so important, we see a trend in the Torah that important mitzvot are usually mentioned multiple times. Shabbat is mentioned, I think, 5 or 6 separate times just in the Torah, maybe even more. Okay, Chag HaMatzot is mentioned 1, 2, 3, about 5 different places. The festival of unleavened bread. Okay, the festivals are mentioned a bunch of different places. Okay, even what the rabbis like to refer to as separation of milk and meat is famously mentioned 3 different times in the Torah. Right, the prohibition of fire on the Shabbat is never mentioned anywhere, not in the rest of the Torah, and not anywhere in the rest of the Tanakh. Okay, other things are mentioned, such as Nehemiah is complaining that merchants are bringing their goods into Jerusalem on the Shabbat day, and he decides to close the gates of Jerusalem so that they can't do it. Right? That's clearly melacha. Right? You're running a marketplace on the Shabbat. That's melacha. That's work. Right? That's running your shops, running your business on the Shabbat. Right? So that would be an example. Okay. But the prohibition of fire is never, ever mentioned again. Okay. A second proof is the story of the wood gatherer. And the first is on that. Escapes me at the moment. Numbers 15. So let's go to that for a second. So I'll just go over to the English just to make things flow a little bit more quickly. Hello. Okay, so here we go. This is Numbers 15, chapter 15, verse 32. While the Israelites were in the wilderness, a man was found gathering wood on the Shabbat day. Those who found him gathering wood brought him to Moses and Aaron and the whole assembly, and they kept him in custody because it was not clear what should be done to him. Then Yahweh said to Moses, the man must die. The whole assembly must stone him outside the camp. So the assembly took him outside the camp and stoned him to death, as Yahweh commanded Moses. So here we have a Shabbat breaker, right? He's gathering wood on the Shabbat day, and he's put to death for violating the Shabbat. Okay, what did he do? He didn't light a fire. He gathered wood. That's a lot of work, right? That's what that actually reinforces the idea that I'm saying here, that what verse 3 is talking about is the milacha, the work associated with all of the work associated with being able to get that fire lit. Okay, it doesn't say that he lit a fire on Shabbat and therefore he was put to death. No, it says he went out and he gathered wood, and he was put to death for doing work on the Shabbat, right? So here we have a clear, straightforward case of someone who's doing hard labor, right? Going out and gathering, dragging big logs back to camp, okay, on the Shabbat, and he's put to death, okay? So those are 2 major proofs. We can also look at the book of Nehemiah, as I mentioned. Very briefly. Nehemiah chapter 10. One second. Here's the dedication of the wall. One second. Oh. All right, I better Google it. There we go, 13. Here we go. Okay. So this is Nehemiah chapter 13, verse 15. Okay. So in those days, I saw people in Judah treading wine presses on the Shabbat and bringing in grain and loading it on donkeys. Okay. So we have examples of the people doing work on Shabbat. It doesn't say anything about a fire here. It says things, first thing we see, treading wine. Well, let me read through the whole thing, okay? Together with wine, grapes, figs, and all other kinds of loads. And they were bringing all this into Jerusalem on the Shabbat. Therefore, I warned them against selling food on that day. People from Tyre who lived in Jerusalem were bringing in fish and all kinds of merchandise and selling them in Jerusalem on the Shabbat to the people of Judah. It's like having Shuk Machane Yehuda opened on the Shabbat. I rebuked the nobles of Judah and said to them, what is this wicked thing you are doing, desecrating the Shabbat day? Didn't your ancestors do the same thing so that our God brought all this calamity on us and on this city? Now you're stirring up more wrath against Israel by desecrating the Shabbat? Verse 19, when evening shadows fell on the gates of Jerusalem before the Shabbat, I ordered the doors to be shut and not opened until the Shabbat was over. I stationed some of my own men at the gates so that no load could be brought in on the Shabbat day. Once or twice, the merchants and sellers of all kinds of goods spent the night outside Jerusalem, but I warned them and said, why do you spend the night by the wall? If you do this again, I will arrest you. From that time on, they no longer came on the Shabbat. Then I commanded the Levites to purify themselves and go and guard the gates in order to keep the Shabbat, the Sabbath day, holy. Okay, remember me for this also, my God, and show mercy to me according to your great love. Okay, so here we have description of Nehemiah seeing people violating the Shabbat. Okay, and we don't see any mention anywhere of anything having to do with lighting a fire, with kindling a fire, right? But what we do see is actual work, right? What we would call in English work. Nothing too mysterious about it, right? Treading wine presses, that's work. Okay, bringing in grain and loading it onto donkeys, that's hard work. Okay. And also the rest of these things, all other kinds of loads, okay? Bringing them into Jerusalem on the Shabbat, that's work, okay? Bringing in fish and merchandise, selling them in Jerusalem on Shabbat to the people of Judah, okay? Going out, selling is work. Buying, right? They're opening up a marketplace. Would you like to spend your Shabbat, in the supermarket, waiting on lines and, with a big shopping cart full of stuff, 3 hours, paying $500, I guess, is these days in the United States. Thank God I'm not there at this point, so I don't even know, and then, standing online and then checking it out and then, putting it in the bags and then dragging the bags to your car, bringing it home, unloading all the bags, putting it in the unloading it into the refrigerator, throwing out all blah, 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 right? You don't want to do that on the Shabbat, right? Buying, selling, this is hard work, okay? So that's what Nehemiah is complaining about, that the Jews are peak retail day in the U.S. I'll bet it is. Aside from Black Friday, which used to be a holiday when I was growing up, now it's double work for everybody. So that's what Nehemiah is complaining about in Nehemiah chapter 13, right? And that's very similar to what we saw in Numbers. What was it? Numbers 15, right? Numbers 15, 32 through 36, okay? Again, these are people doing hard labor. These are people doing things that are work, that are actual work, right? Not lighting, turning on a stove, to boil some water, or not, lighting a candle, or if you smoke, I don't smoke, but if you smoke, lighting a cigarette, or anything like that, right? The issue is not the fire going from off to on. The issue is the work, the milacha involved in making that fire, or what that would have been involved in making the fire in ancient times before there were stoves and electricity and all this kind of stuff. And that you can get a good idea of how much work that is if you go camping, right? And you don't have any firewood already stacked at your campsite, and you have to go out and gather it yourself, and it's going to be cold that night and cold the next morning and maybe cold during the day, right? That's an idea of what we're talking about. And so therefore, I don't think that this verse, Exodus chapter 35, verse 3, is a separate prohibition on the Shabbat. I think it's just a prime example of the type of milacha that if you're not careful about doing it the day before, you'll end up having to do on the Shabbat, or you'll end up being tempted or tending to do on the Shabbat because you were too lazy to do it the day before, and now it's all of a sudden freezing cold, or you have little babies in the house, and now you have to go out and find some firewood, bring it back, and stoke a fire, right? That's my opinion regarding Exodus 35:3. Okay, so to sum up, the rabbis understand this basically as a separate commandment, even though it's subsumed in their 39 types of melacha, which you're not supposed to do on the Shabbat. But they basically understand this as a separate, special commandment. Like, this is the worst melacha you could possibly do. And so therefore, they've done a decent job in trying to balance. I don't think they're right, but at least they've done a better job than the Egyptian Karaites in trying to balance the idea that this does seem like a commandment, but at the same time, they realize that the show must go on, the fire must go on Shabbat. So what they've come up with, for the most part, is that you can have a fire lit before the Shabbat goes in, but once Shabbat comes in, you don't have to put it out, but you can't touch it until the Shabbat goes out. That's basic summary of what the rabbis believe. And then once electricity came along, that changed the entire game for them. So what they basically believe regarding electricity, they don't believe it falls under the rubric of fire. They put it under a building, or I think they call it the makaba patish. No, I can't remember. They put it under the rubric of completing something, a building that you've started. So they say when you open a light switch, you're completing a circuit. So that's like building. And so they prohibit opening and closing electricity, or actually specifically opening electricity, turning on electricity on the Shabbat. But they've come up with all kinds of workarounds, such as automatic timers, or just leaving the electricity on, leaving the thing on before the Shabbat comes in, and just leaving it on throughout all of Shabbat. And they have other gadgets that they've come up with where they use all kinds of loopholes, like grama, where you're not directly causing the electricity to go on, you're indirectly causing it to go on, so they allow that. Anyway, they've come out with all kinds of workarounds so that basically you can live a half-decent life on Shabbat. It really is a pain in the neck, but it's better than not having any electricity or fire at all. And the Egyptian Karaites, as we said, have just, in my opinion, gone way off the deep end. And a true believing Egyptian Karaite, which I don't think there are many of them left, if there ever were, they'll unplug all of their electrical appliances and blow out all fire before the Shabbat comes in, and that is just a cold, disgusting, unpleasant mess. Okay? And so my opinion, to sum up, is that neither of those are right. The rabbis are more right, in this case, than the Egyptian Karaites, but really what the thing that's prohibited is melacha, is unnecessary work on the Shabbat. It's prohibited for anyone, any Israelite, and any permanent member of an Israelite household, permanent member of an Israelite household, as well as gerim, permanent members of the nation of Israel. And it just means that you're not supposed to do any unnecessary labor on Shabbat. Anything that can be done before the Shabbat, you do it before the Shabbat. That leaves a minimal amount, which, because we're human beings and live in the physical world, must be done on the Shabbat. Like I said, you have to tie your shoelaces. You have to put your clothes on. Things like that. But as much as possible, you're not gonna, you're gonna eat dinner. You're not gonna, unless you have. I always like to, you have to clear the table after you eat dinner. That's work, right? But after Friday night dinner, you're not gonna just leave everything on the table, right? Unless you have 3 different tables, right? Maybe you have a Friday night meal table, and in a different room you have a Saturday morning table, and then you have a Saturday afternoon table, Saturday lunch table, right? Otherwise, you have to clear the table at the very least. Maybe you don't have to wash the dishes; you can throw them all in the sink or whatever. But you have to at least clear the table, right? You've got to do some minimal cleaning up. So these are all things that. So there's a certain amount of milacha, there's a certain amount of work that must be done on Shabbat just to live as a human being. But the idea of the Shabbat is it should be kept to a minimum, and as much as possible should be done the day before. Okay, so that's that. That's the end. Oh, and then of course, to sum up, that fire is not explicitly, or is not separately prohibited on the Shabbat. It's just an example of something that, if you're not careful, would cause you to do a lot of work, or would tempt you to do a lot of work on the Shabbat. Okay, so that's that topic. All right. Any questions? Any comments? My God, it's already been going at it for an hour and a half. We've only gotten through literally 3 verses in our parsha. Well, that's okay. They're important verses. Okay. Anybody want to say anything? Any questions? Any comments before we move on? No? Okay. I'm going to take a break for about 5 to 10 minutes. I'm going to put a little bit of music on. I want to get the charger. I want to just stretch and all this kind of stuff. So let's reconvene. It is now exactly 0 on the hour. So we'll reconvene in about 10 minutes. About 10 minutes after the hour. Okay? Put this song on again. Yeah. There we go. So.
Alta, alta es la luna cuando empieza a esclarecer. Y yo hermosa y sin ventura nunca llegué a nacer. Y yo hermosa y sin ventura nunca llegué a nacer. Mis ojos se hincharon de tanto mirar la mar. Vapóricos van y vienen, letra para mí no hay. Vapóricos van y vienen, letra para mí no hay. Hermoso, 2 taras tiene con él, la una que arrollada dos, la otra que echa sheshbesh, la una que arrollada dos, la otra que echa sheshbesh. Mi querido es alto y vano y una vara de expander. Mi madre hizo colada, lo metió a detener. Mi madre hizo colada, lo metió a detener. Na, 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 na. A la una yo nací, a las dos me engrandecí. A la una yo nací, a las dos me engrandecí. A las tres tomé amante y a las cuatro me casé. A las tres tomé amante y a las cuatro me casé. Dime niña, ¿dónde vienes? Que te quiero conocer. Que si no tienes amante, yo te lo haré defender. Que si no tienes amante, yo te lo haré defender. Al salir y para la guerra, dos besos al aire di. El uno es para mi madre y el otro para ti. El uno es para mi madre y el otro para ti. A la una yo nací, a las dos me engrandecí. A las tres tomé amante y a las cuatro me casé. A las tres tomé amante y a las cuatro me casé. A la una yo nací, a las dos me engrandecí. A la una yo nací, a las dos me engrandecí. Cuando bello y hermoso, ahí me voy yo. Cuando bello y hermoso, ahí me voy yo. Cuando bello y hermoso, ahí me voy yo. Cuando bello y hermoso, ahí me voy yo.
Okay, welcome back to the World Alliance of Qara'im Shabbat Torah study. So I thought maybe what we do, since this is such an important issue. Oh shoot! I forgot to. 1 second. Get the charger. Hang on.
Cuando bello y hermoso, ahí me voy yo. 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 Cuando bello y hermoso, ahí me voy yo.
There we go. All right, let's try this again. So what I thought we'd do is look at some of the commentary. We stop music. Okay. Okay, there we go. So I thought we'd look at, I think we looked at Robert Alter last year, but let's just take a peek at what he has to say. So Exodus 35. Page 827. Alrighty, so I don't remember what he has to say, but let's take a look. Okay, so verse 3. So Mr. Robert Alter, he says, this prohibition is a new specification. The lighting of fires might well be associated with the tasks involved in constructing the tabernacle, because fire would have been required for all the metalwork. And in one Ugaritic text, fire is burned 6 days in order to erect a sanctuary for Baal. But the kindling of fire is against merely making use of fire that has been set accidentally is clearly a primary labor of civilization, as the Prometheus myth suggests, a kind of inauguration of technology, and so it is understandable that a special prohibition of it on the Shabbat should be spelled out. So he's not saying exactly what I was saying. So he's kind of taking, let's see here, he's kind of taking what I hear from a lot of rabbis, that Shabbat has to do with creative work, which I don't think is true at all. I think, for instance, you can write poetry or play music on Shabbat, which is creative work. So the rabbis have this idea of, I've heard when I used to learn yeshiva, the rabbis, quote unquote, would say that you can't do anything that's creative work, because that's like creating on Shabbat, and God stopped from creating. I don't think that's the case per se. You cannot do anything that's difficult labor, that's hard labor. Okay, if you consider creative work hard labor, then I guess you can't do that. But so that's kind of what he seems to be tapping into, that, right? So you hear a lot from in modern rabbinical circles that it's a day to stay away from technology. That's stupid, to quote what is it? I think Borat. No, it was Ali G when he has an interview where he says something like, "Oh, I'm against technology," and then some guy says, "Well, you live in a house, don't you? That's technology, right? You use a wheel. That's technology, right?" So everything is technology. If you live in a house and use a wheel, you're using technology on Shabbat. So maybe you shouldn't do that. I actually, this idea of refraining from technology. Technology changes the meaning of technology, and technology changes over time. So to refrain from it on Shabbat doesn't make any eternal sense, shall we say? But so I think that's what he's kind of tapping into. That he's saying that it's kind of like staying away from technology, and he's bringing Prometheus, right? So Prometheus is the Greek, I guess he was a Greek god, Greek dude, Greek mythology dude, who brought fire to man. I guess he was a god, or Titan, I think a god, right? So he's not. So that's what he's saying here. Here, so what he's doing here is also, so that's kind of rabbinical. What he's doing here is also tapping into a kind of rabbinical idea, which is, but not exactly. So he's saying that the lighting of the fires may well be associated with the tasks involved in constructing the tabernacle. So he's relating this to, he's kind of doing what the rabbis did, in a sense, but not exactly. So what the rabbis do is they come up with this idea of 39 prohibitions of the type of work that you're not supposed to do on Shabbat, which comes to some pretty weird day-to-day, results, such as like you can't carry a key outside of your house if you don't have an eruv, if you don't have a rope around your neighborhood. But what the rabbis get that idea from is they say that because the building of the tabernacle, right? So now we're going to get into the building of the tabernacle here, comes right after the verses about Shabbat, that's a hint in the Torah that the prohibitions on Shabbat are the same as the work that's required to build the tabernacle. So that's silly, in my opinion. That's not the way the Torah works. It may link things together because they're related. That's very true. The Torah is very associative, almost like going through Wikipedia and jumping from one page to another page that, based on what links you want to follow. That's very associative, but it doesn't really, but what the rabbis are suggesting is it's like some kind of unwritten, hidden connection, right? That secretly, that you need the oral law of the rabbis would to understand that the prohibition of Shabbat is next to the building of the tabernacle, because the oral law tells us secretly that the prohibitions on the Shabbat are the same as the work that's required for building the tabernacle. So that's silly, and that's not exactly what Robert Alter is saying, but I think he's getting it from that idea, that rabbinical idea. And so what he's saying is something a little less silly, or not silly at all, but what he's saying is that the reason that fire being prohibited on the Shabbat is mentioned here is specifically it might be the type of work that's involved in building the tabernacle, and there might be temptation to build the tabernacle on the Shabbat, since it was such an urgent thing. And so therefore it's mentioned here to make sure that the tabernacle, or that specific, that aspect, or that work associated with building the tabernacle, or any work associated with building the tabernacle is not done on the Shabbat. I think that's what he's saying. Okay. But he's in neither of his, is that okay. But in neither of his two ideas that he puts out here is he saying exactly what I'm saying. He's basically tapping into rabbinical ideas. So what I would like to do is I would like to try a new commentary, which I downloaded. Well, it's not exactly download. Oh, I think I can't. I'm not going to be able to access it right now. Too bad. Let me try again. Yeah, I can't do it. Unfortunately, another patron is using the book. Check back later. Okay, so this is called the Cultural Background Study Bible. No, wait a second. Can I access it? No, it's not allowing me to access it. Okay, 1 second. Let me try one more time. I can't do it right now. Let me just see. Yeah, limited preview. Okay, I'm gonna have to check back later. No, let him be. Let the cat be. Okay, I'm in the middle now, please. Okay, please don't bother me now. Right. So, yeah, I would have wanted to check out that commentary, but ain't gonna happen right now. I can try again a little bit later and see if it's available, and maybe we can go back to it. because this is like an online library, which you're allowed to check out a book. But if someone else is checking it out, or if a certain amount of people are checking it out, you can't do it. We could go then to, well, let's go with Hertz. Not that he's going to say anything earth-shattering, but we could do Rabbi Dr. Hertz. And so this is going to be Exodus 35. I'm going to have to cut ahead a little bit here. 407, let's try here. Hold on, I got to close the door. I got cat activity going on inside. Okay, so let's see where we are. So that's already Leviticus. Let's go back to like here. Leviticus 5. Back. Exodus additional notes. We're getting close. Let's try here. Exodus 34. So we're close. Exodus 38. Yeah, this is in a weird order.
He's saying a lot. Almost a big fight.
Okay. So Exodus, okay. That's the Haftarah. So we got to go back a little bit. Exodus 37. 36. Okay, Exodus 35. Exodus 35. Exodus 30. Oops. No, I think it's here. 1 second. Okay, Exodus 35. I think it's going to be the next page. Oh, boy. This is confusing. 36. 4. Oh, boy. 1 second here. I think I have to go back one. Believe it or not. There it is. Exodus 35:3. So, all right. So what does Rabbi Dr. Hertz say? Okay, I'm going to try to highlight this here. I hope this works. So, can you guys see that red line that I drew? I hope so. Let's see if I can catch it myself. No, wait a second. Yes, I see it. Okay, so that answers my question. Okay, so we now enter upon the final section of the book of Exodus, dealing with the actual construction of a sanctuary. Instead of giving a brief notice announcing the execution of the divine command, Scripture describes in detail how every instruction was faithfully and lovingly carried out. Okay. Holy day. All right, so let's start here. Let's read here. So the exhortation which God had given to Moses concerning the holiness of the Sabbath, which must not be violated even for the sacred purpose of building the tabernacle, is repeated by Moses to the congregation. So he's relating the two in that way as well, right? That the Shabbat is related. In other words, that the reason that he's basically saying the kind of the rabbinical thing, which is that the reason that these verses about the Shabbat are inserted right before the description of the building of the tabernacle is that it should be clear that the work for the tabernacle is done on the Shabbat, not supposed to be done on the Shabbat. But I don't think that's the case, because we see in the previous chapter, in chapter 34, we see all of these various laws about Chag HaMatzot and Pidyon, not only Pidyon Haben, the redemption of the firstborn animals and the firstborn people, etc. Okay, so I don't think that's the case. I'm gonna disagree with that, but taking that one step further, that's where the rabbis get the idea of the 39 milachot. They say that that's a hint that that what is prohibited on Shabbat are the same things that are required for building the tabernacle, and that's the secret reason, only revealed through the rabbinical oral law, or the oral law, that the Shabbat verses are placed in juxtaposition with the tabernacle building verses. Okay, all right. So kindle no fire. This command has been understood by certain Jewish sects to prohibit even the enjoyment of light or fire on the Shabbat. The rabbis, however, apply it only to cooking and baking. So I think he's referring here to the Karaites, as a matter of fact. This I think he's referring to the Karaites. The rabbis, however, applied only to cooking and baking. In connection with the manna, it had already been pointed out that there must be no preparation of food by fire on the Shabbat, and that's going to be in Exodus 16:23. We're not going to go look at that right now. And that's it. All right. Last thing I'll do very quickly is look at Ibn Ezra, and then we'll move on. So Exodus. Oops. Okay, so here we go. So 35:3. So this is what he says. Lo tivaru. Highlight this in. There we go. Ba'avur shiskir b'yom rishon. Ubeshvi'i b'chag hamatzot kol melacha lo yaseh b'hem. Latir ochel nefesh. So let me just read it for myself and I'll explain. Amar ata b'Shabbat lo tivaru esh le'afot lechem u'levasher basar ki ha'esh tzorech lechol ma'achal. בגאון רב סעדיה חיבר ספר נכבד, תשובות על חולקים על קדמוננו על נר שבת. Okay, we'll get to that in a second. All right, so what is Ibn Ezra saying? So Ibn Ezra is saying, actually, he's saying, Ba'avur shiskir, oops, one more time up to here. Okay. So it says in Exodus 12:16, it specifically says that you're not supposed to do milacha. I think it says there malechet avodah, but you're not supposed to do milacha. Basically, you're not supposed to work except in the case of I forgot the exact words there. Sher yechel ben nafsho or something like that. Exodus 12:15. Let's go check it out. Exodus 12:16. Here. Okay, so starting here. This is Ibn Ezra is referring to this verse here, or to this phrase here. Kol melacha lo yaseh bahem. So no work should be done on them. On what? On the first and seventh days of Chag HaMatzot, of the festival of unleavened bread. Ach asher yechel lechol nefesh. Except that which is to be eaten by every person, or by everybody. Okay? In other words, hu levado yaseh lechem. That alone may be done to you or for you. Okay? So basically what this verse is saying is you're not supposed to do on the first and seventh day of Passover, you're not supposed to do any work except food preparation you're allowed to do. There's a dispensation for food preparation. So what the Ibn Ezra is pointing out here, okay, Amar ta b'Shabbat lo tivaru esh le'afot lechem levashel basar. So what the Ibn Ezra is now saying here is that this verse, Exodus 35:3, which says, "Do not light a fire." Lo tivaru esh b'chol moshvatechem b'yom haShabbat. Don't kindle a fire on any of your habitations on the Shabbat day. This is in response, or this is in contrast. This is meant to be in contrast to this verse in Exodus 12, where on Passover you are allowed to do work, or you're allowed to prepare food. The Ibn Ezra is saying that it's mentioned here to specifically say that on Shabbat you're not even allowed to prepare food. That's a very interesting idea. I'll have to think about that one. I think he's kind of right, as a matter of fact. That might be the reason that it's mentioned here. But if that is the case, so it's to contrast. So this is meant to contrast with Exodus 12:16, which says, "Don't do any work on the first and seventh days of Passover, except that which is required to make food." Here, don't light a fire on the day of Shabbat, in order to emphasize that you're not even allowed to prepare food on the Shabbat, even to prepare food, right? To contrast with the first and seventh days of Passover. So if that is the case, if what the Ibn Ezra is saying is the case, and it is an interesting idea, he might actually have something there. But if it is the case, then the interesting thing that the prohibition, according to him, is therefore not against lighting fire per se. It's against lighting fire because you'll use it, or lighting fire to use to prepare food, which is actual milacha, which is food preparation, is actual work. Okay? All right, so that's what the Ibn Ezra says. That's an interesting idea. And then he goes on to say, because fire is required for every type of food. And then he goes on to give a little ding to the Karaites, believe it or not, and he says, Rav Sadia chiber sefer nechbad tshuvot al cholkim al kadmonenu al ner Shabbat. So Saadia Gaon, who was an enemy, shall we say, or certainly a what's the word I'm looking for? An opponent. For a different word, but that will do. An opponent of the Karaites. Well, can you go please close the bathroom door? The smell is stinking out into here. Okay. Okay, thank you. All right, so he's talking about the Saadia Gaon, writing a book, Nichbad Tshuvot al Sefer Nichbad Tshuvot, who that answers regarding those who disagree al kadmonenu, on our ancestors, regarding the lighting of a Shabbat candle. So who's he referring to? He's referring to the Karaites, and here we see explicitly, right? References to the Karaites who prohibit a candle that is lit before the onset of Shabbat from continuing to burn on the Shabbat. Be back in 1 second. Okay, so that's exactly what we were saying before. The Karaites. So this is now. So the Ibn Ezra lived in what? I think the 11th century, 1000s or the 1100s. Let's look it up exactly. So 1089 to 1090 to approximately 1165, right? So 1090 to 1165 approximately. And so we're talking about in the 11th and 12th century, 1000s and 1100s. Okay, so already back then, and he's referring back to the book that was written by the Saadia Gaon, who lived before him, I think by actually 100 years, if I'm mistaken. So he lived from 892 to 942. So we're talking already back in basically what was the 10th century, the 900s, right? Because he wasn't writing when he was 8 years old. So in the 900s, the Saadia Gaon was already responding to the Karaites, who by that time were already coalescing into a group actually called the Karaites, responding to the Karaites, basically saying how silly they were to put out a candle before Shabbat comes in. And in fact, the whole tradition of lighting Shabbat candles comes as a polemic response to the Karaites, who would not allow fire to continue to burn once the Shabbat came in, and that's exactly why the candle lighting tradition by the rabbis was established. It was a polemic response to the Karaites, who said that all fires must go out once the Shabbat comes in. So this is already back in, at the latest, right, the mid 900s, right, is when Saadia Gaon was writing, and that's what Ibn Ezra is referencing here. He's referencing Saadia Gaon or Saadia al-Fayumi. Sadia ben Joseph al-Fayumi. So that's a direct reference to the Karaites. Okay, we've already spoken about that. I actually agree in this case with Sadia Gaon and Ezra, even more so. Right, I go beyond the rabbis, and I've already explained why and what reason is. Okay. I can't imagine that the Levites guarding the Mishkan would not guard on the Shabbat day. What's your thoughts on that duty and the observance? They're explicitly sacrifices that must be brought on the Shabbat. So clearly, the Kohanim were working on the Shabbat. Clearly, they were bringing sacrifices on the Shabbat explicitly. So, right, there are certain sacrifices that must be brought on the Shabbat, and we know that the lamp, the menorah must be lit every night and put out every morning. So that would include Friday night and Saturday morning. So certainly the Levites and the Kohanim were working on the Shabbat. I would imagine, however, that they had what would be called in modern Israel. So if you live in Israel, you know that everything keeps on working on Shabbat, but they have what's called matkonet Shabbat, meaning Shabbat arrangement, Shabbat configuration. And that means that everything is on minimal staff. So they don't shut down the police department on the Shabbat, but they keep the staff to the minimum. They don't shut down the fire department on Shabbat. They keep the amount of staff to the minimum. They don't shut down the hospitals on Shabbat, but the staff is kept to a minimum, right? There's no elective surgeries done on the Shabbat, right? It's only emergency stuff that has to be done on Shabbat. Exactly mimic the idea of Shabbat. That which needs to be done on the Shabbat can and must be done on the Shabbat, or is allowed to be done on the Shabbat. That which can wait to the next day is not done on the Shabbat, right? So I'm pretty sure it was the same idea in the Beit HaMikdash, right? The minimum that had to be done, or that which needed to be done on the Shabbat, was done, and that was not considered. That was considered milacha, but necessary milacha. As we always said, as I've said now a bunch of times, there's not to do milacha on the Shabbat does not mean don't do any work. You have to clear the table after you eat Friday night. Okay. You're not going to leave a mess and then put the next plates on top of the old plates, with the fish bones on the table, and then you're going to have your eggs the next morning, pushing the fish bones off to the side. You've got to do a certain amount of work, right? That's matkonet Shabbat. You do the minimum work required to do on the Shabbat. We're human beings. We live in the physical world. There's a certain amount of work that must be done on the Shabbat, but it should be kept to a minimum. Okay. So when it says here, Sheshit Yamim Ta'aseh Melacha, okay. So for 6 days, or I should say, here, okay. Anyone who does milacha, or the whole idea of milacha on the Shabbat, is not don't do any work at all. It means don't do any unnecessary. The amount of work that you do to the absolute minimum, to the bare minimum that you have to. Okay, so that would be the answer to that. To your question, who was it? On Evior. Okay, and now let's move on. So we looked at the Ibn Ezra, who was referencing the Saadia Gaon, who wrote a polemic who explained basically how silly the Karaites were for putting out for fire before Shemin within that one, and therefore the rabbis instituted the tradition of lighting Shabbat candles, whereby you light the fire before Shabbat comes in, and then you allow the fire to continue to burn once the Shabbat comes in. That's the whole idea of the Shabbat candles. This candle lighting time, right? Candle lighting time is in Israel, it's 40 minutes before sundown, before sunset. In the United States, I think it's 18 minutes before sunset, right? So that's when you light the candles, and the candles are supposed to continue burning once the Shabbat comes in, specifically as a polemic against the medieval Karaites, who said all fire must be blown out before the Shabbat comes in. Okay. So thank you, Ibn Ezra, for referencing the Karaites. Not in a good way, but you did it. Okay, so now we get on to a completely different topic. And yes, I believe it is a completely different topic. I don't agree at all with all these people that try to link the two. Okay. And I certainly don't agree with the rabbis and their midrash, their creative use of the juxtaposition of this topic with this topic in order to come up with a list of laws that are prohibited on the Shabbat. But the Torah just tends to jump around sometimes, and there's not always necessarily connection. Maybe the closest connection would be You know, I mean, this is not only linked to the tabernacle, this is also linked to what came before, which is Moses going up to Mount Sinai again and getting more laws while he was up there for 40 days. Okay. All right, materials. And let me just see something here. So we actually have, I mean, again, chapter and verse is a tricky or is a deceptive kind of thing because it was laid down by, I always forget the name, Stephen Coventry or something like that. Verse, we've mentioned this a number of times. No. Stephen Langton, is it? Where is it? There it is. Okay. So let's mention this again. The system of numbers that is found in most Bibles today was devised by Archbishop Stephen Langton about the year 1200. He inserted these chapter numbers into a Latin translation of the Bible, and these numbers eventually made it into almost all translations of the Bible, right? So this chapter and verse can be very deceptive because this is chapter 34. Now we go into chapter 35, and we have the Sabbath linked with the materials for the tabernacle, but that's not really what's going on. Really, we have to look at the paragraph markings here. So here we have a peh. Okay, that means a parsha ptucha. That's like basically a chapter ending. Okay, and here we don't have. You don't see a peh here. You see a samech. That's a parsha stuma. That means like a minor chapter ending, or basically like a paragraph. So where's the last peh we have? We have right here. Okay, so this is really a chapter ending, and then this here begins a new chapter, and it continues all the way through here, and then onto what we're calling chapter 36, onto here. So that's a chapter, and now here starts a new chapter. Okay, so this stuff here is really more closely related to all of this stuff here. To this stuff here, okay, which includes, first of all, a bunch of laws that came before it, and then Moshe writing this stuff down, then the radiant face, and then we get the Shabbat laws, and then end of chapter. Now we go into materials for the tabernacle. Okay, so not that the rabbis, when they came up with this idea, they didn't have these chapter divisions, but I'm just saying when we read through it, because this idea of the 39 melachot is already mentioned. It's already mentioned in the Mishnah, so we're going all the way back to 200 CE, more or less, and that's already being based on laws that were probably floating around in rabbinical circles for already at least 100 years. Who knows, maybe a little bit more, right? So we're already talking about going back to this idea of the laws prohibited on the Shabbat being the same as the laws that are done to make the tabernacle, already is going back to around 2,000 years ago. Okay. Okay. Another one. What about the Battle of Jericho? March 7 days, and on the 7th, what's your thought about where? Yeah, that's true, right? On the 7th day, yeah. There you go. So clearly, they at least marched around Jericho. You know, there's the famous instance in the book of Maccabees. Maccabees are getting let me not answer that one. Let the book of Maccabees answer that one directly. Okay, so Maccabees on Shabbat. So first Maccabees, this is chapter 1. One second. More time. 41. Why don't I see it? I'm not going to use this version. Let me find another one. First Maccabees 8, chapter 8:34. So let's get a book of Maccabees going here. So we've got our first Maccabees. A little bit larger. Copy of Maccabees. Notes, references, external links. Good enough. Here we go. This larger. So this is the book of Maccabees, obviously telling about the fight of the Judeans against their Seleucid, I don't call them the Seleucids, but I think it's actually supposed to be pronounced Seleucid. They're Seleucid overlords, right? And eventually recapturing the Temple Mount, recapturing the temple and cleansing it of unclean animals. So the Maccabees were fighting against the Greeks, the Seleucid Greeks. And if we go here, so why don't I see it? 1 second here. I must have gotten the wrong chapter and verse. Let's go back. Please fight on Shabbat. Where the heck is it? If I can't find it in a second, I'm just gonna skip it. Let's do it this way. Okay. Here we go. So this is chapter 1. Okay, so let's make this larger. So at that time, many who were seeking righteousness and justice went down to the wilderness to live there. They, their sons, their wives, and their livestock, because troubles pressed heavily upon them. And it was reported to the king's officers, talking about the Greek king's officers, and to the troops in Jerusalem, the city of David, that those who had rejected the king's command had gone down to the hiding places in the wilderness. Many pursued them and overtook them. They encamped opposite them and prepared for battle against them on the Sabbath day. So the Greeks came out to fight the Judeans, the Jews, on the Sabbath day. They said to them, in other words, the Greeks said to the Jews, enough of this, come out and do what the king commands, and you will live. But they said, the Jews said, we will not come out, nor will we do what the king commands, and so profane the Sabbath day. Then the enemy quickly attacked them, but they did not answer them or hurl a stone at them or block up their hiding places, for they said, let us die in our innocence. Heaven and earth testify for us that you are killing us unjustly. So basically, the Greeks want the Jews to surrender. The Jews refuse to surrender. It's on the Sabbath day. And so the Greeks attack the Jews on the Sabbath day. And the Jews refuse to fight back because it's the Sabbath. So they attacked them on the Sabbath, and they died, meaning the Greeks attacked the Jews, and with their wives and their children, livestock, to the number of 1,000 persons. When Mattathias and his friends learned of it, they mourned for them deeply. And all said to their neighbors, if we do as our kindred have done and refuse to fight with the Gentiles for our lives and for our ordinances, they will quickly destroy us from the earth. So they made this decision that day, let us fight against anyone who comes to attack us on the Sabbath day. Let us not all die as our kindred died in their hiding places. Okay, so that basically, basically, the Jews realized that the Greeks could attack them with impunity on Shabbat, because if they didn't fight back, so then Matityahu, the father, he laid down an ordinance that the Jews should fight back on the Sabbath day. Okay, so that is clearly a case of pikuach nefesh, right? What the rabbis like to call pikuach nefesh, meaning you're allowed to work on the Shabbat day if it has to do with saving a life. But I would say that you don't even need to go that far. That goes back to what we said. You're allowed to work on the Shabbat day if it's necessary. Anything that's necessary, like clearing the table, like watering the garden if all the plants are going to die if you don't water them. Okay, maybe you can be really clever and come up with a way to water them, not on the Shabbat, but I haven't come up with such a way when it's 105 degrees outside, right? So there's certain things that just have to be done on the Shabbat, and I would say saving your life is one of them, right? You don't need a special pikuach nefesh kind of exception. It's anything that you're supposed to not do on the Shabbat, anything that which doesn't have to be done on the Shabbat. Okay, saving your life. If you can do work to clear the table on the Shabbat because you can't just leave a mess there because you have another meal coming up, then certainly you can work to save your life on the Shabbat, right? So you don't need a special pikuach nefesh dispensation. I think I've used that word a lot today, but it's a good word. But that's the answer there. So Matityahu answers your question for you, Ethan Avior. Okay, yes, we can fight on the Shabbat, and the reason he gives is very simple. Because if the Gentiles, if the enemies of the in this case it's already the Judeans, the Jews, if the enemies of the Jews find out that they will not fight back on the Shabbat, then what are the enemies going to do? They're going to attack them on the Shabbat, obviously, right? You guys all have heard of the Yom Kippur War, right? That's exactly what happened. The entire nation of Israel basically shuts down on Yom Kippur, and stupidly at that time, I guess it was Golda Meir and maybe the entire nation thought that somehow or another the Arab enemies would have enough respect for the Jews at least not to attack them on Yom Kippur, and that's exactly when they attacked them. When they were shut down because they thought they weren't ready to fight back or wouldn't fight back, right? So that's the result of letting your enemy know that there's a day that you won't fight on. So that Matityahu says yes, we fight even on the Shabbat. Okay. Finally, we're going to get into the tabernacle. I'm going to go for about another 25 minutes, and that's fine. We've done 3 verses in this parsha, but they are central verses to Karaism, to the Karaite understanding of the Torah, and they're important. So I'm glad we spent that much time on it. All right, let's move ahead a little bit, and now we're going to be talking about putting together the Mishkan, the tabernacle. Okay, so before I do, any final questions? Any questions or comments before we move on? All right, chapter 35, verse 4. Oh, let's see if I can take this sucker out now. Close this. Close that. Borrow unavailable. Refresh. No, I can't. Okay. So, verse 4, Wayomer Moshe el kol adat b'nei Yisrael lemor ze davar asher siwah Yahweh lemor. So Moshe spoke to the entire, remember translating adat as witnessing community of the children of Israel, saying, Ze davar asher siwah Yahweh lemor. This is the thing, these are the things which Yahweh commanded, saying, here we go. Chu me'itchem truma leYahweh kol nadiv libo yivieha et tirumat Yahweh zahav wa kesef u nehoshet. So take for yourselves, or from yourselves, a truma, should translate as a donation, but it literally means a lifting up. So a bringing up. So, but we'll just stick with donation, which comes from the Latin, I believe, dare, which means to give, like Spanish dar. So I think it's the past participle of dar is donus or something like that. And a donation, so it means a giving, but here it's really a bringing up, a lifting up. Okay. the Yahweh, okay, Kol Nadiv Libo, anyone who is generous of heart, or they translate here, willing of heart, Yavi'eh et Terumat Yahweh, shall bring the donation to Yahweh or of Yahweh. And here we have gold, silver, and bronze and nechoshet. Okay. So bronze is a mixture of copper and tin. I think it's 90% copper and 10% tin. And zahav is gold. That's the most expensive metal that's used. Second is silver. That's second most expensive. And the third is bronze. So things that are made for bronze, for instance, are the altar of sacrifices. It's made with acacia wood and then not plated. We said we're using a different word, and then lined. No, I can't remember the word. We'll go with plated, even though that's not exactly the correct word. But it's covered with bronze. The sink also, or the basin that's next to the altar of sacrifice, is covered with bronze. But the closer you go into the tabernacle, the more expensive the metals get. So once you're in the Kodesh, the holy area, everything is made out of gold, or at least acacia wood, lined with gold. And then there are two things that are made of 100% pure gold. I'm not talking about the instruments, which are made of 100% pure gold, but of the main things, the menorah is made 100% of gold, and the ark cover is made 100% of gold. Okay, so all of this gold is necessary. Okay, utchelet, argaman, tola'at shani, washesh wa'izim. Tchelet, we've spoken about these substances a bunch of times before, so that's we'll just go with light blue or sky blue or just blue. Argaman is violet. Tola'at shani is usually translated as scarlet. Shesh is usually translated as ochre or orange, or just I think we call it fine linen. Second, fine linen. Nizim is goat's hair. Okay, so basically different types of fabrics, or at least the materials required for fabrics. Okay, orot elim ma'adimim. So then we have red ram skins. Or dyed red ram skins. And then orot tachashim. And this is the skins of the leather of tachashim. We've spoken about tachashim before. Nobody knows exactly what it is. If we go to our list of animals, and I'll just again reiterate very quickly. Tachash. Where is it? 1 second. Maybe it's not here. Hold on a second. Where did I stick it? Tabernacle materials. Oh, good. Cool. So here, tachashim. English translation, nobody really knows. These are suggestions that have been made. Dolphin, dugong, which is another sea mammal, another marine mammal. Seal, porpoise. These are all marine mammals. Goat, badger, tanned leather, fine leather, blue skins. So nobody really knows what a tachash is. These are the various things that have been suggested. Oh, and by the way, here we have reasons to not understand Exodus 35:3 as a prohibition against fire per se. So maybe what I'll do is maybe we'll go back to this afterwards, or maybe we won't go back to it. Okay. So tachashim va'atzei shitim, that's acacia wood. Again, acacia is a tree, probably one of the only actual trees that grow in a desert area. So acacia, you can see it growing wild all over southern Israel. So there's an acacia tree. Okay, so basically a lot of different things were made of acacia wood and then covered with copper or gold. Okay, so those are all the raw materials, and then we have more. Shemen lema'or, so that's the lighting oil. Bisamim leshemen amishcha. This is the oil for the spices for the anointing oil. We spoke about that last week. Uleketot samim, and the incense, the spices for the incense, or the incense spices. Okay, we spoke about those actual substances last week. Avnei shoham, avnei miluim, le'ephod u'lechoshen. So we have the ephod. That's the Levites. I'm sorry, the priests, the high priest's garment. Spoke about that also last week. There we go. I think that's the picture we used. Okay. Yeah, that wasn't the one. It was a better one. 1 second. Basically good enough. Okay. So now I don't like that one. 1 second. Let me see if I can find the one we used last week. This is it. Okay, so the ephod is this outer garment, okay, and attached to the outer garment are these two shoulder pads, and they are on the two shoulder pads are shoham stones, usually understood as onyx, O-N-Y-X, and on those onyx stones, on 6 on each onyx stone, are engraved the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. So that's what it's speaking about there, the onyx stones, the avnei shoham. This is the choshen mishpat. And there are 4 rows of 3 stones each. Again, each one has one tribe of Israel engraved on it. So that's talking about all of those stones for the shoulder pads, and for the choshen mishpat, for the breastplate of judgment. Okay, so that's that. Let's move on. וכל חכם לב בכם יבואו ויעשו את כל אשר ציווה יהוה. So anyone who is Hakham Lev, who is wise of heart, right? Basically, so if I remember correctly, or if I understand correctly, I'm trying to remember now, I think the heart, it's usually said, was considered the seat of wisdom or understanding in the ancient Near East, whereas the kidneys, so the kidney liver, I think the kidneys were considered the place of emotion. Okay, so Chacham Lev, wise of heart, right? Meaning you just got the knack, right? You're channeling God in a sense through yourself, right? That's what that's applying, right? There's just something like you see a master craftsman at work, and you just know they're, in a certain sense, you can't call them prophets. They're not hearing the word of God and transmitting it, but in a certain sense, they have a, I don't know, what you would call in modern Hebrew, a ruach hakodesh. They have a certain spirit in them that is clearly given to them by God, that they're able to, just create these beautiful things, whether it's I won't use the example of a carpenter, whether it's a metal worker or even a computer programmer or whatever the case may be, right? They're creating these beautiful things. They just have it in them, this kind of spirit which allows them to create these beautiful things. So Chacham Lev, literally wise of heart. Here Robert Alter translates that as whose heart urges him. No, that's the wrong verse. Every wise-hearted man. Maybe he mentions. So let's just read Robert Alter's comment on this. As before, the wisdom, chokhmah, in question slides from the notion of insight or intelligence to skill in a craft, in part because intelligence itself was thought of as a kind of teachable craft for those who had the capacity. The craft valence of the collection used here is especially pronounced in verse 25, which speaks of every woman wise-hearted with her hands in the skill of spinning. All right, so it doesn't exactly relate to what we were saying, but whatever. Okay, Bachem, so every wise-hearted person among you, Yavov Yasu et kol asher tziwah Yahweh, should come and should do all that Yahweh commanded. In other words, commanded regarding the building of the tabernacle. And in other words, anyone who has a skill, any artisan who has a skill that could be of use in building the tabernacle should come. Okay, et hamishkan. Hamishkan, et, o, halo, wa et, michsehu, et, kirasao, wa et, kirashao, wa et, birihao, et, amudao, wa et, adanao. So this is talking about, so the tabernacle and the tent that goes over the tabernacle and its cover and basically all of the things around it. Okay? Excuse me. Verse 12. Et Aaron, so this is talking about the Ark of the Covenant. Et Badav, that's the poles that go in the Ark of the Covenant. Et Hakaporet, that's the Ark cover. Et Parochet, that's the curtain that separates between the holy area and the Holy of Holies, the area where the incense altar is and the area where the Ark of the Covenant is. Parochet HaMasach, verse 13. I'm just going to skip through this. This is just reiterating all the different things. Okay, et shulchan. So that's the I'm not going to skip. I'm just going to go through quickly. Is what I mean to say. That's the showbread table. That's also in the holy area to the right of the incense altar. Et badao, et kol kelav, et lechem apanim. So this is the actual showbread. So I guess bakers as well. I'd volunteer for that. Et minorat hamaor. So that's the candelabra. Et keleha and all of its various things required to take care of the lights, pokers, and I can't remember, they're listed explicitly in last week's parsha. Et neroteha, and the candles, et shemen hamaor, and the lighting oil, which is 100% pure shemen zayit. We saw it last week. It's shemen zayit zach katit. Zach means pure, meaning clear, top level extra virgin olive oil, and katit. It's not it's beaten rather than, I think the alternative was, I can't remember, but it's beaten. Okay, verse 15. Et mizbach ketoret, and the incense altar, et bada, et shemen hamishcha, et ketoret hatamim, et masach hapetach, v'fetach hamishkan. So again, just various parts of the Mishkan. It's reiterating. I'm going to skip ahead to verse 16. Et mizbach ha ola wa et michbar ha nehoshet asher lo et badao wa et kol kelao et kior wa et kano. Okay, so again, different parts of the Mishkan. Well, that's technically not the Mishkan. Different parts of the well, I guess it is the Mishkan. Yes. Et kelao chatzer et amudav et adaneha wa et masach sh'ar chatzer. So this is the outer curtain that goes around the courtyard. Et יתדות המשכן, ואת יתדות החצר, ואת מיתריהם, את בגדי השרד, לשרת בקודש, את בגדי הקודש לארון הכהן, ואת בגדי בניו לכהן. So these are all the clothes of the Kohanim. Okay. We'll go through these verses quick, and then we'll talk about Betzalel and Holiav, and then I think we're going to end the study, and maybe I'll play part of the video of visiting the replica of the tabernacle in Timna Park, north of Eilat. Okay, verse 28. Kol adat b'nei Israel minifnei Moshe. So all of the people of Israel went out from before Moshe. Remember, they had gathered to listen to Moshe. So now they're leaving Moshe. When did they gather to listen to Moshe? That was in chapter 33, I believe. Where was it? Why can't I find it? One second. No, it's verse 35. Vayakhel Moshe So Moshe gathered together all of the witnessing community of the children of Israel, all the community of the children of Israel, gathered together. He told them about the Sabbath. So as he gathered together, he told them about the Sabbath. Then he told them that he needs all of these materials. And then he told them he needs people to do all the work. And then that's it. They went out. So all of the congregation, all of the community of the children of Israel went out from before Moshe. Where'd they go? They went to get all the stuff that Moshe was necessary. Okay? Verse 21. So basically, again, to reiterate, from here to here, Moshe gathers the people here and dismisses the class dismissed over here. Okay? And that's what he said to them while they were all gathered together. And this was after he came down the mountain, off the mountain, right? Maybe not exactly after he came down off the mountain, but soon after, right? Because it speaks about what he did regarding his shining face a bunch of times. Okay, so, I mean, it speaks about what he did a bunch of times. What he did doesn't matter. All right, so in verse 20, so now we have a description of the gifts that are offered, starting verse 21, actually. יבוא כל איש אשר נישאו ליבו וכל אשר נדבה רוחו אותו הביאו את תרומת יהוה למלאכת אוהל מועד ולכל עבודתו ולבגדי הקודש. Okay, so this is where, okay, so let me just point out one or two things here. So basically, okay, I'll just translate. All the people share who nas'o libo, whose hearts were lifted up, meaning, you know, who had the spirit to give. And all who had a giving spirit, or a spirit to, you know, a giving spirit we'll go with. They brought donations to Yahweh, or the donations of Yahweh, literally the liftings up. They lifted up, they brought the things up to Yahweh. For the work of the tent of meeting, that's the tabernacle, it's basically the same as the Mishkan. And for all its, so for building the tabernacle, for all of the stuff required to carry on the service of the tabernacle, and for the and for the holy garments, meaning the garments for the Kohanim. Okay, so this is important here because it says for the work regarding the these things, the Mishkan, the tabernacle, its service, and the holy garments. And the word here is mimalechet. Okay, the underlying word there is milacha. That's the same word that we saw here in Exodus 35:2 that you should not do on Shabbat. Okay, sheshit yamim ta'asim milacha. Okay, and anyone who does kol ha'oseh bo, anyone who does on the Shabbat milacha, work, should be put to death. Here, it speaks about the lamalechet, the same word. Okay, it's in what's called the construct form, but it's the same word. So for the work of the Ohel Moed, so the rabbis say, we have the word milacha here regarding the tabernacle. We have the word milacha here regarding what you're not supposed to do on the Shabbat on pain of death. That's what cements the tie between what you are not supposed to do on Shabbat being the very same things that are required to be done for building the tabernacle. So they do something called I think they call it, I think it's a hekesh, or it might be a gezerah shava. At any rate, they say, the word milacha appears here regarding the building of the tabernacle, and the word milacha appears here regarding that which you're not supposed to do on Shabbat. So that links the two topics together. It's not just that they're juxtaposed. They also use the word milacha. So the rabbis, in their illogical way, say that's proof. That's God secretly telling us And the only way we can really know this is it's revealed in the oral law that Moshe got from God. This is what the rabbis say. Okay, it's secretly telling us that what is prohibited on the Shabbat. What is the milacha that's prohibited on the Shabbat? Well, the word milacha appears here. The word milacha appears here regarding building the temple. So any type of work that's required to build the temple is the same type of work that's prohibited on the Shabbat. And the Torah is secretly telling us that by secretly linking these verses with these verses. And the hint is that can only be revealed through the oral law of the rabbis. The hint is that the word milacha appears here, and the word milacha appears here. That's what the rabbis say, and then they go ahead to come up with the lachot, the 39 types of work that are prohibited on Shabbat, and you can look that up, quite frankly. Okay, so for instance, you're not allowed to lachrosh. Lachrosh is to plow. So because you're not allowed to plow, the rabbis say you're not allowed to walk on grass on the Shabbat. So they say that plowing was one of the types of work required for building the tabernacle. Because I guess I'd have to go check it again, but I guess you had to raise certain things like grain, let's say, to bring grain offerings, right? So plowing is required for the service of the tabernacle. And therefore, since plowing is one of the types of work required for the service in the tabernacle, therefore, that's one of the types of work that's prohibited on the Shabbat. Fair enough. We shouldn't be going out and plowing our fields on the Shabbat, but then they take it to all kinds of ridiculous extremes. And I'm not sure exactly who brought it to these extremes, but it developed over time to the point where we used to learn in yeshiva that you should not walk on the grass on Shabbat because you're plowing the grass, right? You're kicking it up with your feet, and that's plowing, and that is prohibited on the Shabbat. So when you start off with stupid things, you end up with even stupid. How do you get out of your house? I guess you're stuck in your house. I guess you're gonna have to, make put wood down or something. Anywho, so.
The game children used to play, like, don't step on the lava.
Yeah, exactly. Don't step on the grass. Please do not step on the grass. All right. Right. So we are over here, verse 22. Wow, it's getting late already. Yavo hanashim al hanashim. So the men and the women came. So this is explicitly mentions here the women as well. Kol nadiv lev, anyone who was generous of heart. Here we go. Ve'viu hach wanezim with taba'at wakumaz. Okay, this is interesting. Wakumaz kol kli zahav kol ish asher henif tenufat zahav leYahweh. So the men and the women. Listen to this one, Volk. I've mentioned this a bunch of times. What did they bring? They brought hach, which are translated as earrings, nezim or nose rings, taba'at are rings, kumaz, necklaces, kokli zahav, and every type of gold jewelry. So the men and the women brought, what did they bring? Earrings, nose rings, necklaces, and all kinds of jewelry. Okay, so that implies that in ancient times that even the men wore jewelry. They wore earrings and nose rings and rings and necklaces and all kinds of stuff, right? Because it explicitly says the men and the women. If it were just the women wearing the stuff, right, then it would just say the women. Or if it were just the women giving it to the men, and because the women, let's say, were not supposed to approach the tabernacle, or well, they're allowed to, but let's say the men are doing the actual work of bringing the stuff to the tabernacle or to Moses, then it would just say the men. But it says explicitly the women and the men, implying that men wore extensive jewelry that we might think is kind of like that you wouldn't see on a typical Western man. Well, now in this day and age, you can see pretty much anything. But when I was growing up, you pretty much wouldn't see earrings, nose rings, maybe a ring, maybe a necklace or a gold chain or something like that. But you definitely wouldn't see earrings and nose rings on men. In my school, if you came into school with a nose ring or an earring and you were a guy, you'd probably would have gotten your ass kicked, quite frankly, or you very least would have been made fun of. Okay, so but in ancient times there were all kinds of jewelry, including nose rings and earrings, and those very nose rings and earrings were donated to be used to build the to build the tabernacle, right? So specifically, it would imply gold, right? So the gold earrings, nose rings, etc., jewelry of the men and women of Israel were donated to build the tabernacle. Okay. So I don't know where they got these, where they started wearing jewelry. I mean, I guess they just come out of Egypt, right? Not very long ago, right? Just a couple of months ago. So maybe it was an Egyptian thing. I don't know. I'm not an Egyptologist, but maybe in Egypt, I guess you'd have to look at various reliefs or various stonework from Egyptian times and see if everybody wore jewelry. Maybe that's where the Israelites got it from. I'm not sure, but this definitely seems to imply that they wore all types of jewelry. Okay, verse 23. So these are the different types of fabrics: the blue, the purple, etc. Okay, so they brought different fabrics as well. ונחושף הביאו את תרומת יחווה וכל אשר נמצא איתו עצי שיטים לכל מלאכת העבודה הביאו. So now it's talking about them bringing also gold. So we mentioned gold above. So now this is silver and bronze. Again, bronze is 90% copper, 10% tin. Hence the Bronze Age, when they learned to smelt copper with tin and create bronze. And also atzei shitim, acacia wood. We saw what acacia wood looked like before, what acacia tree looked like before. Okay, so different substances. Okay, verse 25. So v'chol isha hachmat lev biyadeha tawu uyaviu matwe et techelet wa et argaman wa et tolat sheni wa et shesh. So this is talking about spinning yarn. Matwe is so any woman who had spun yarn, they brought that which they had spun. And I'd like to look up this word. So it only occurs once. So that is a hapex legomenon. That's the fancy word for saying it appears only once in a text, in this case in the Tanakh. So from tava. Okay. So they're bringing it from Aramaic, from Syriac, Assyrian. Why? So they're basically bringing it from other ancient and modern Semitic languages to try to prove what tawa is, but it only appears, well, I guess twice in the entire Torah and in Exodus 35, and in Exodus 35. Okay, so that's that. Verse 26. Let's move on to v'chol hanashim asher nasa liban utana b'chokhma tawu et ha'izim. So they spun the wool of the goats, spun it into goat fabrics. And the Nisi'im, the heads of the tribes, they're the ones who brought the onyx stones. Remember, that goes on the shoulder pads here. And the Avnei Miluim, and the filling stones, or the setting stones. How do they translate that again? The stones to be set. Stones to be set. Those are these 12 stones here in the Choshen Mishpat, in the breastplate of judgment. La ephod u la Choshen. For the ephod is the outer garment, but referring in this case specifically to the shoulder pads of that are attached to that outer garment. And this is the Choshen Mishpat, the breastplate of judgment. Okay. Verse 28. ואת הבושם ואת השמן למאור לשמן המשחה לקטורת הסמים. Verse 29. כל איש ואישה אשר נדב נדבם אותם להביא לכל המלאכה אשר ציווה יחווה לעשות ביד משה, הביאו בני ישראל נדבה. So basically that's just summarizing that every man who had material and their heart moved them, brought the material, and so that's summarizing basically all the donations that the children of Israel gave for the tabernacle. Okay, we're going to go the rest of these verses in this chapter, and then we're going to stop. We've already been going at it for about... Jacob had them hide their jewels before going to Esau. Also, didn't he? Jacob had them hide their jewels. I think that's probably a midrash. That's not mentioned anywhere in the Torah. Not that I remember. Okay, verse 30. Vayomer Moshe el bnei Israel. So Moshe said to the children of Israel, Re'u qara Yahweh b'shem Betzalel ben Uri ben Hur lematei Yehuda. So the head artisan, okay, is going to be Betzalel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur, from the tribe of Yehuda. So let's talk about who is this Betzalel. He's the grandson of this guy Hur. Hur appears in Exodus 17. And let's just grab it in the English. So we have the 1 second here. Just want to get the context in my head again. So we have the incident of the people grumbling, and Moses strikes the rock and water comes out of it. And then the Amalekites come out to fight Israel. Right? So here in Exodus chapter 17, verse 8, the Amalekites came out and attacked the Israelites at Rephidim. Moses said to Joshua, choose some of our men and go out to fight the Amalekites tomorrow. I will stand up on the top of the hill with the staff of God in my hands. Okay, so Joshua goes out and fights the Amalekites, to make a long story short. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went to the top of the hill. As long as Moses held up his hands, the Israelites were winning. But whenever he lowered his hands, the Amalekites were winning. When Moses' hand grew tired, they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. Aaron and Hur held his hands up, one on one side, one on the other, so that his hands remained steady till sunset. So Joshua overcame the Amalekite army with the sword. Okay, so we've seen Hur before. Hur is one of the people that held up Moses' hands when Joshua went out to fight the Amalekites. Right, so Moses held up his hands, and eventually his hands got tired. Well, he went up to this hill with Aaron and Hur. Aaron, of course, is his brother. Hur is the grandfather of Betzalel. So this is an important family in Israel, right? Aaron is with Hur holding up Moses' hand as Joshua is out fighting the Amalekites. Okay, and when Moses gets so tired that he can't hold his hands up anymore, then Hur is holding up one of his hands. Okay, presumably the left hand, because Aaron is mentioned first, Hur is mentioned second. Usually the right comes before the left, but it doesn't say so explicitly. Maybe they switched. I don't know. Maybe they got tired and switched. Who knows? All right, but that's, so we've seen this guy Hur before. Okay, so here Hur is the grandfather. So Bezalel is the son of Uri. And in First Chronicles 2:20, right, we just have the begats, and here we have again Uri mentioned as the father of Bezalel, and Hur mentioned as the father of Uri. So Hur, right, we see it's the same Hur that held up Moses' hands, okay, of Bezalel. Okay, so we've got our head artisan, right? So, and he isn't, so Yomer Moshe al Bnei Israel Ru'u, see. So Moses says to the children of Israel, look, or behold, Kara Yahweh b'Shem. So it's, Bezalel was chosen by Yahweh directly, right? Kara Yahweh b'Shem. Yahweh called Bezalel by name. Okay, literally called Yahweh by the name Bezalel ben Uri ben Hur Lamate Yehuda. Okay, so it's not just that Moses picks Bezalel to run the show, to be the chief artisan. It's that Yahweh himself, God himself, chooses Bezalel. Okay. And by the way, the main artist school in Jerusalem okay, it's called the Bezalel Academy of Arts and Designs, of Arts and Design, right? Named after that very same Bezalel. Okay, so right, verse 31. Ruach Elohim, and he filled it with the Spirit of God. Who filled him with the Spirit of God? Yahweh, God. The Chokhmah, with wisdom, Tuvuna, usually translated as understanding, Bida'at, or discernment, Bida'at, knowledge, B'chol Melacha, and regarding all types of work, right? Basically, filled him with this wisdom to carry out all these different types of artisanal work. I hate that word artisanal because it's used so often these days. Artisanal cheese, artisanal yogurt. But in this case, it's used correctly. Artisanal knowledge, right? Okay. Verse 32, Lachshov machshavot. So Lachshov in modern Hebrew means to think, but it really means, it can also mean to think in the Torah, but it also means to like craft. Here they translate it as design. So design, to craft crafts. Lasot bezahav v'kesef and choshev, and to work in gold, silver, and bronze. Verse 33. Uba haroshet even, and in the engraving of stones. So literally the plowing, we mentioned before plowing, that's lacharosh, but here it's regarding the, so literally the plowing of stones, but it means the engraving of stones, limalaot or barchoshet esh, or the of setting stones, or barchoshet esh, and in the carving of wood, lasot b'chol malechet mach shavet, and to do all kinds of crafts, of work of craftsmanship. Okay, verse 34. Ule horot natan bilibo, who Ularot Natan Belibo, who, okay, and also to instruct. So he's not only going to do all this craftsmanship, he's going to instruct others. He's going to have a whole workshop, right? So he's going to have apprentices or underlings who are going to help him carry out the work. Okay. So to instruct, he also placed in his heart. In other words, he placed in his heart the ability to show others how to do this. And now we get his assistant. This is Oholiav ben Ahisamach lemate Dan. There's no college of Oholiav, not that I know of anywhere in Israel. So this guy's always forgotten, but he's also he's been Bezalel's assistant, Oholiav. Okay. And I don't think his father or grandfather are mentioned. Well, only his father's mentioned here. So his father's only mentioned in the context of being the father of Oholiav, right? So as we go through life, we remember Bezalel usually. We always forget Oholiav. So let's take a moment to remember Oholiav as well. Okay, very good. And he's from the tribe of Dan. Verse 35, and we're going to end after this verse. Milei otam chokhma lev. He filled them with wisdom in their hearts. Lasot kol malechet harash, to do all kinds of manner or all kinds of crafts work regarding harash, that's engraving. The choshev, craftsmanship. Rokem, that would be embroidering. Bitchelet ba'argaman, that's in blue, in violet, in scarlet. Mitolat shani ubeshesh, again either ochre or fine linen. It's often translated as the oreg, and oreg is also to weave. Osei kol melacha v'choshev machshavot, to do all of the necessary work for building the tabernacle. And again, we see the word melacha. So the rabbis again use this to relate the building of the tabernacle. There we go. The choshev machshavot, the choshvei machshavot, and to be the crafters of craftsmanship. Okay, the designers of beautiful designs. Okay, so basically, what we have here is a list of all of the. So first, we have all of the materials that are brought by the men and women of Israel. Then we have the appointing of Bezalel, the grandson of Hur, the guy who held up Moses' hand along with Joshua, and Oholiav, his assistant, as the head artisans or head craftsmen for doing all the work regarding the tabernacle. And that's it. We're going to have to stop here. So very quickly, the rest of Exodus basically is the building of the tabernacle. So the tabernacle is begun, construction proceeds, and then we have a very detailed description of all of the stuff that was described, what should be done earlier in Exodus. Now it's described how it is actually done, or that it is actually done, right? Showbread, the lampstand, the incense altar, the burnt offering altar outside of the tent of meeting, the bronze basin, the courtyard. One second here. And then we basically have an accounting, right? So for instance, so here's an accounting of, for instance, the gold that was brought. So 29 kikar is usually translated, I think, as a talent. So 29 talents and 730 shekels. So I'm not sure how many shekels make up a talent, how many shkalim make up a kikar, but it's more than 739, right? Maybe it's 1,000. I don't know. Let's see if. Talent. I don't know. I'm not going to look it up now. Right? But let's say it's 1,000. I'm going to go with 1,000 for now, right? So if that were the case, and a shekel, I think they say is about 8 grams. I can't remember now. Anyway, shekel's pretty small. So so it's 900 and where is it? No, 29,730 approximately 29,730 shekels of gold, and etc. So that's the accounting. Verse 39, again, it goes on with now we're talking about the priestly garments being conducted. and then we get to Moshe's looking over and approving the work, and then the setting up of the tabernacle in 40, and maybe we'll end here because this is the last subject in the book of Exodus. Next week we go on to the book of Leviticus. Okay, so I'll take a look at that in a second, stereo. So so verse 34, the tabernacle is built, it's completed, it's inaugurated, and then we have here verse 34, and I'll end. So the cloud. Remember, the cloud it was on Mount Sinai. It was originally leading the Israelites out in front of the desert, but then when God came down to speak to Moses or to speak to the Israelites in Exodus 20, he came down in a cloud. So the cloud was on Mount Sinai, and now the cloud moves ostensibly from Mount Sinai to the Ohel Moed, to the tent of meeting. The cloud covered the tent of meeting, ukavod Yahweh maleh et hamishkan, and the glory of Yahweh filled the tabernacle. Okay, where specifically we know between between the cherubim, that's where God's presence sits, and we spoke about that a lot last week. V'lo yachal Moshe lavo el ohel moed ki shachan alav anan kvod Yahweh maleh et hamishkan, and Moshe could not come into the tent of meeting because the cloud had rested upon it, and the glory of Yahweh, the tabernacle. Verse 36, and when the cloud would, so the way that, I'll just translate it, when the cloud would go up from off of the tabernacle, the children of Israel would travel for all of their journey. So the way that God said, hey, it's time to get out of here, guys, is the cloud would rise up from the tabernacle and start moving. And it's like, all right, we better follow that cloud, because that's God and he's leading us. Right? Remember, God was going to go home and stop leading, and then Moshe, we saw earlier in chapter 34, basically convinced God to stick around for a little while longer. Yes, these people suck. They're a real pain in the neck, literally in the neck. And but you're a merciful God. Okay, Yahweh, El Arahum Hanun, you're a merciful and kind God. So please forgive them. You know what they're like. Lead us to the land of Israel. Verse 37. And so if the cloud did not go up, they would not travel until the day that it went up. So basically, when the cloud stayed put, Israel stayed put. When the cloud started moving, it's like, hey, catch that cloud, boys. Okay, verse 38. And the cloud, because the cloud of Yahweh was upon the tabernacle during the day, and fire was upon at night, just as we saw when the cloud and the fire were leading Israel out of Egypt, right, towards the Red Sea. We saw that explicitly, that there was a cloud during the day leading them, and at night it turned to fire, right? Right in front of the eyes of all the children of the house of Israel throughout all of their journeys. So this is the way they were led through the desert: the cloud during the day, the pillar of cloud during the day, the pillar of fire at night. It would rest on the tabernacle. That's where they would camp. It would start moving. They would start moving, and it would eventually lead them up to the land of Israel. Okay, so let's just look very quickly. Genesis 35:4. Yeah, so it doesn't say anything. One second here. Shabbat, שם מזבח לאל הנרות, ואומר יעקב אל ביתו ואל כל אשר עמו, הסירו את אלוהי נכר. So specifically we're talking here first of all about these foreign idols. So okay, so so Yaakov was in Shechem, and now he's going to go back to Bethel. Bethel is where he originally had the Jacob's ladder dream. And so before he goes back to this holy place where he had built an altar to God, or a standing stone it was originally, and now he's going to build an altar to God, to Yahweh, or to El Shaddai. Then, okay, so get rid of your Elohei Nachar, foreign gods, purify yourselves, and change your clothing. So basically getting ready to go to this where Jacob had the original dream. בית אל ויעשה שם מזבח לאל העונה אותי ביום צרתי ויהי עמדי בדרך אשר הלכתי. So then we're going to build an altar in Bet El. Nu el Yaakov v'kol Elohei Nachar. So they gave to Yaakov all of these foreign gods, asher bi'adam, which were in their hands. So little statuettes, basically, right? What they call household gods. Like a Christian might walk around with a statue of Jesus today or something like that. Okay. Ve'et nizamim asher ba'aznehem. And the earrings the rings that were in their ears. ויטמון אותם יעקב תחת האלה אשר עם שכם. So he said to his entire household, okay. So I'm guessing that the reason it mentions, so I guess what you're trying to show is that they were wearing earrings, and that presumably would cover also men. Okay. And you're saying this prior to Egypt. Oh, okay. Okay, so Genesis 24:22. So that was put on a woman. But yeah, that does prove jewelry. And this is also on a woman, but here it would imply also, yes, on men. Okay, all right, that works. Those verses work. Okay, very good. Okay, so let's end here. Before we end, any questions, any comments? It's been a long study. It's getting late. Anybody? All right, then. We're going to end it here. And I thank you all for joining me. This has been Vayakhel and Pekudei, portions of the Torah from the World Alliance of Qara'im. I'm Hakham Melech ben Yaakov of the World Alliance of Qara'im. I hope you enjoyed the study. And be'ezrat Yahweh, we will see you again next Shabbat. I wish everybody Shabbat Shalom and a Shavua Tov, depending on where you are in the world. And we'll go out with a little bit of music.
Alta, alta es la luna cuando empieza a esclarecer, y yo hermosa y sin ventura nunca llegué a nacer. Y yo hermosa y sin ventura nunca caras tiene con él, la una que arrolla dados, la otra que echa sheshbesh, la una que arrolla dados, la otra que echa sheshbesh. Mi querido es alto y vano y una vara de expander. Mi madre hizo colada, lo metió a detener. Mi madre hizo colada, lo metió a detener. Morenica mi me llaman, yo blanca nací, y del sol del verano yo me hice así. Morenica, graciosica sos, tú morena y yo gracioso y ojos pretos tú. Morenica mi me llaman los marineros. Si otra vez a mí me llaman, yo me voy con ellos. Morenica, graciosica sos, tú morena y yo gracioso y ojos pretos tú. Morenica, graciosica sos, tú morena y yo gracioso y ojos pretos tú. Morenica, graciosica sos, tú morena y yo gracioso y ojos pretos tú. Morenica, graciosica sos, tú morena y yo gracioso tú.
you.